Welcome to Mr. Nightbleed. Tonight, in 7 real encounters with ghosts inside abandoned cemeteries, we step into the forgotten graveyards where the weeds grow tall, the gates rush shut, and the air itself seems to watch. These are not stories from books. These are the moments when the living crossed paths with something that was never supposed to be seen again. Real accounts. Real people. Places where footsteps echo when no one is walking, and where names carved in stone still whisper through the dark. My goal this month is to reach 4,000 subscribers. Almost 90% of you drift in, listen, and vanish back into the night without subscribing. Don't be one of them. Join the darkness. Subscribe now. Before we begin, tell me in the comments where you're watching from, and what time it is for you. And if there's an abandoned cemetery near your town, a place people avoid after sunset, type its name below. Because once the sun is gone, once the world goes quiet, some spirits remember they were never ready to leave. Kill the lights. Silence everything around you. Take one slow breath, and let us begin. I'm not trying to convince anybody. I'm not asking for advice. I'm writing this down because sleep hasn't been working like it used to, and the story wants out of my head. If you know the stretch of 2-lane blacktop outside Marfa, past where the tourists pull off to look for the lights, you know the little iron gate that sits by itself on the edge of the desert. It belongs to a fenced rectangle of ground. Old graves, older stones, some names you still hear in town, and some that ended with whoever they planted there. I used to think of it as a landmark I passed on my night routes. Now I think of it as something that noticed me back. My name's Thomas Kellerman, most people call me Tom. I'm 42, work county maintenance on the night shift. Cones, barriers, mile markers, all the stuff you never think about unless it's missing when you need it. I'm divorced. It wasn't dramatic, just slow and empty, and my fault in the way habits are your fault. I drink coffee that tastes like road tar and keep a picture of my little brother in my wallet, even though he's been gone 5 years. Overdose in a bathroom at a Whataburger 2 towns over. That detail sticks like a burr. Whataburger. I guess it makes the ending cheaper in my head. I still talk to him sometimes when I'm driving alone and the open FM stations fade into static. On the night this happened, September, heat hanging low and the wind smelling like iron and mesquite, I had Deputy Carl Ruiz riding along. Carl and I aren't quite friends, more like men who have shared enough long, empty miles to know each other's best and worst stories. He's one of the few people who can make me laugh out loud in an empty cab at 2 a.m. He carries his own weight too. Divorced, works too much, enjoys teasing me about my tendency to see shapes in the dark. Kellerman, he likes to say, you're the only man I know who can turn a bush into a suspect. It sounds mean written down, but it's friendly when he does it. There's warmth under the barb. The call that put us near the cemetery was simple. A rancher had complained the temporary barrier on the frontage road kept getting knocked down by wind or kids, and county said to check it. The truth is, sometimes the barrier falls over because somebody wants to drag a deer carcass without hassle. September's still hot, but the wind at night has an edge and the stars look sharpened. That's how they appear in West Texas when you're alone, and the land doesn't even bother to pretend it can hide you. We hit the barrier site around midnight. I was expecting to be in and out, which is how you get lazy. Cones upright. Reflector tape still shining like it should. I tightened a bolt with the truck's work light burning white on the shoulder. The kind of small task that makes you feel like a useful paperclip in a very large drawer. Carl stretched his legs and smoked a cigarette. You want to sit a minute? He asked. You're doing that thing with your jaw. I didn't know I had a jaw thing, but I guess I do when I'm grinding my molars. We drove the quarter-mile to the cemetery because it's the closest flat patch where you can pull off without worrying about soft shoulder. I'd parked in front of that iron gate a dozen times on other nights to eat a sandwich, or call my daughter when she answered, or stare at nothing. The gate is chest-high black iron, 2 swinging leaves with a curl of metal at the top like a treble clef. No chain, just a simple latch. Inside, the graves rise slightly in the middle and dip at the edges, like a boat someone forgot to flip. The stones are a mix: white limestone eaten by rain, red granite that still keeps a clean edge, a few iron markers tilting like old fence posts. On quiet nights you can hear crickets in the low grass, a noise that feels like the land breathing. On windy nights the grass makes this dry whisper, like someone cleaning a brush against your boot. I killed the engine. The quiet came down, and with it the smell of the place. Iron, dust, mesquite sap, and something else like old water. I unwrapped a ham sandwich. Carl did a slow walk along the fence line. Just a patrol thing deputies do to feel like they did something. "You ever notice," he said, waving his cigarette at the stars, "how out here you can hear your own thoughts trying to jump ship?" "Mine jumped years ago," I said, talking through bread. He laughed, the way he laughs when he's trying to slide past something he doesn't want sticking to him. The white of his cigarette end bobbed along the fence. He flicked it in a little arc and said he had to take a leak. I waved to go ahead and kept chewing, before anybody asks. Yes, the gate was open when we pulled up. I heard the hinge complain when the wind pushed it a little wider. I noticed small things like that. It's my job. The latch was resting against the post, not hooked. The truck's clock showed 12:13. What I remember next are the boring human bits that make everything feel real right up until it stops. The bread sticking to the roof of my mouth, the cold spot on my thigh from the soda can in my pocket, the way the glove box rattled because I keep a loose screwdriver in there, and never fix the rattle because once you fix one rattle you hear the others. Sometimes I think the soundscape of my life is small problems I never bothered to solve. Carl disappeared between the headstones, muttering something about telling the ancestors sorry. I didn't pay attention. He's the kind of guy who narrates his own actions when he's comfortable, and I was glad he felt comfortable. I took out my phone to check a text I already knew wasn't there. My ex-wife sends one-liners when she needs a date for a school thing and silence otherwise. I opened the wallet photo of my brother like I always do when I shouldn't and said, "What would you think of all this?" He never answers, but I hear the shape of his laugh sometimes in the fan noise of the truck. The first wrong thing wasn't supernatural. It was just quiet. The crickets shut off like someone muted the desert. The wind kept moving because it always moves out there, but the bugs stopped. It was like being in a grocery store when a power outage hits. The sudden blankness of everything you didn't notice until it's gone. "Hey," I called. Not loud enough to be a real call, more like a test. "You good?" No answer. "Not a problem yet. He's a grown man." I took another bite. A minute stretch turned into 2. I don't like calling for people twice because it always makes me feel like the second call's going to sound different, like it'll carry something I can't take back. So I waited, then did the mature, responsible thing and pretended I was checking the barrier notes on my clipboard, so I had an excuse to call his name a second time. "Carl?" That time my voice sounded wrong to me. Too high, too eager to be friendly. The wind's hard on sound out there. It can take your words and walk them a few feet away and set them down someplace you didn't intend. I waited again. I could feel the sandwich going cold in my hand. Something clinked. Not a chime, just the sound of metal rubbing metal. A fence sound. I looked at the gate out of reflex, and that's when I saw it swinging slowly inward, like the wind had remembered to move it. The latch hung free. I could have sworn I had seen it hanging the other direction a minute ago, but I didn't make a federal case of it. Wind does dumb things. Hinges get old. None of us are as stable as we pretend. Still, I put the sandwich on the dash and stepped out. Gravel under my boots did that crunch that always sounds louder when you think you might be interrupting something. I took my flashlight but didn't turn it on yet. The truck's dome light painted the first few feet of ground the color of a bad memory. "Carl," I called again as casually as I could. "We gotta roll soon, man." There's this feeling you get when you're about to walk into a room and you know someone's on the other side of the door, even if they're quiet. The air gets focused, like it's pointing at you. That feeling stepped into the space between me and the open gate. It wasn't fear yet. Fear is noisy. This was the opposite. I hooked the gate with 2 fingers and pushed it back with that little squeal the hinge loves. I stepped through. The ground inside is a hair softer, like the difference between the road shoulder and the bar ditch. Mesquite branches brushed my sleeve and left that green, almost citrus smell. I called his name again, not as loud as I meant to. The light from the truck made a square around the gate and then lost interest. Beyond that was starlight. Starlight looks helpful until you need it. The first row of stones are low, limestone, names shaved by weather until they're more texture than letters. I prefer those to the polished ones. They look like they belong to the place. I paused by one that had a date from 1911 and put my hand on it like I do. It's a dumb habit, but I always feel like I should say evening to the old ones. I didn't say anything this time. The quiet felt too thick to throw words into. Something shifted. Not far. The sound you get when someone adjusts their stance on gravel and freezes. I swung the flashlight up and painted the rows with it. People write about how flashlights make you feel safe, but that's a lie. A flashlight is a promise you can't keep. It gives you a bright center and dark edges and tells your brain, anything not in the center owns you. The beam cut across the caretaker bench near the middle. I didn't expect to see Carl just popping up like a jump scare. I did expect him to curse and tell me to quit being his mom. Nothing. The beam drifted. I caught the edge of a boot print in a patch of sand that doesn't hold prints well, which made me feel brave for noticing it. I followed the prints, or thought I did, until the next patch of sand was clean. No print. The ground had the brushed look it gets after wind. No help there. "All right, Carl," I said, trying on annoyance because it fits better than fear. "You got 2 minutes to get your—" I stopped. To my right, something moved behind a headstone. Not the gait of a person walking. It was slower, like the first lean of someone standing out of a low chair. I aimed the light and found nothing except a tall stone you could hide behind if you were a jerk who wanted to pull a joke. It's exactly the kind of thing Carl would do if he felt I was heading toward spooked. He delights in catching me half embarrassed. I decided to be the adult and go back to the truck. He could finish his smoke and find me there. I turned. The gate was closed. That detail feels theatrical when you say it out loud. I know how it sounds. But the gate we had left open was now sealed to the post, latch hooked. The wind can do a lot. The wind does not hook latches. I stood there longer than I should have. A mosquito found my wrist and made its case. I brushed it off without looking away from the gate. I don't know why I didn't just go unhook it. I could have. The reason I'll give is that the quiet had turned from stillness to pressure, and I suddenly felt like any move I made would be the wrong one in a way I wouldn't understand until later. A shape slipped between stones 2 rows over. Again, not fast. A careful, deliberate glide, like someone landing each foot and listening to what the ground had to say about it. My brain did the thing where it tries to fit known faces over unknown bodies, and it used Carl because that's what it had available. Shoulders about his width, height similar. The beam landed where it would have been if it had kept moving. "Blank space, Carl, cut it out," I said, and heard my voice bounce off the iron like it had less body than it should. The smell of iron got stronger, like wet coins. The clink again. I swung the beam and caught the latch. It had lifted, just a whisper. If you've ever watched a cat push at something on a table to see if it will go over the edge, the determination looks like that. Quiet, steady pressure for the thrill of gravity doing what it does. The latch rose half an inch and settled. I felt something like embarrassment for staring at it, the way you feel if you're caught watching a door too long. "Tom." The voice came from behind me, way behind me, the outside of the fence. I turned so fast the flashlight scraped the inside of my wrist and left a welt I didn't feel until later. Carl stood by the truck in the dome light. He looked a shade paler than men look when they've just peed and are satisfied with themselves. He wasn't smiling. His hands were up, palms out like he was trying to calm a horse. "Come on," he said. "We're done. Let's go." "What the hell," I said, but my voice was quieter than his. "Did you go around?" "I was just—" "Tom," he said again. "We're not doing this. Come on." I walked to the gate like I hadn't been planning to the whole time. I unhooked the latch. It made a small fussy sound like it had been interrupted. I stepped through and pulled the iron behind me. It clicked on its own, soft as a breath. Carl didn't touch it. He looked over my shoulder one time, quick and sidelong. The way you look into a mirror when you think you might see something you're not allowed to know. He's not a man who does that. He grabbed my elbow, gently but firmly, and walked me to the truck. I didn't argue until we were inside with the doors shut and the engine turning. The AC came up like a new layer of sound. "What's wrong with you?" I asked. "You look like a ghost, man." I meant it as a joke and heard it fail. "I don't want to talk about it," he said. He was staring at the windshield like it was a window into somewhere better. He didn't put on his seatbelt. He didn't need to tell me to drive. I drove. We were maybe 30 yards off, tires whispering on asphalt. When I did the one thing I'll regret until I die, I checked the rear view. Habit. You look to see if your gate is shut. Your load is secure, your past is staying where you left it. The iron gate showed up like a dark letter on lighter paper. It was open, wide open, and in the middle of the opening a man stood very still. He wasn't a shadow. He wasn't a trick of headlights because we didn't have any cast that direction. He was standing square, with his weight even, like a person who had been told to wait in a doorway and took the instructions seriously. The reason my hands went cold on the wheel is not because there was a man standing in the gate. People stand in gates. The reason is because my brain fitted a face to the body, and with no help from me, it chose Carl. My first thought was a dumb, protective one, that someone was messing with us by dressing like him. My second thought was not a thought at all, just a lowering animal thing in my chest that made breathing noisy. I didn't slow down. I didn't say what I saw. I looked at Carl in the passenger seat. He had his gaze locked forward. His lips were moving. It took me a second to realize he was praying under his breath. I hadn't heard him do that before. "I'm not looking," he said, as if to someone besides me. I didn't tell him. I don't know if that made me a good friend or a bad one. We didn't speak until we hit the wider highway and the truck felt less like a target and more like an appliance again. After a mile, I tried the kind of tone we had used 100 times to climb down off jumpy nights. "Kids," I said. "Somebody playing dress-up? I swear to God, if that's Mike Chavez—" "Don't," Carl said. "Don't make a story out of it. Just leave it. We've joked each other out of fear before. Not this time." I told myself to be quiet. We rode with the radio off. The AC rattled and found its rhythm. Every time I came to a stop sign, I had to sit on my hands to keep from checking the rear view. We got back to the yard. He climbed out and didn't say anything except, "I'll see you." It wasn't rude. It wasn't even short. It was careful. He got in his cruiser and left. I stood with the truck idling for a minute. The yard dog came out and did his usual lean on my leg. That helped. I told myself the desert does this to people sometimes. It takes the already thin places and pulls them a little thinner so light goes through. Wrong. In the morning, I showered and slept and dreamed. The ordinary dream where you're late for a test you've already taken. I woke up to a text from Carl that said, "I'm taking a week. Don't call." It wasn't like him. But it wasn't my business, or that's what I told myself. I did my route alone. I took the long way around the cemetery without thinking about why. If this were a movie, the next part would have a neat loop, evidence or a second sighting that proves the first one. Real life doesn't usually do loops. It does drift. All I can give you are the off angles. The next week, Carl turned in his resignation. The week after, I heard he'd sold his truck and was moving to his sister's place 3 counties north. On his last day, he came by the yard to sign something. And I got 5 minutes with him because I needed to know if we had the same night or 2 different ones. "What did you see?" I asked, trying to sound like a man who wouldn't laugh. He didn't look at me. He looked at the gravel by our boots like an answer might be spelled there. "I heard you call me," he said. "But you weren't calling me. You were behind me," I said. "At the truck," he nodded. His jaw did a thing I recognized from my own jaw in the mirror. I went to take a leak and I got turned around somehow. Stupid. I'm in my own county and I can't find my way out of a half-acre yard. I walked between stones and got that, you know when you think a door is open and you smack into it because it's closed? That feeling, but inside your chest. Then I hear you say my name, not from behind me, but from ahead. So I head toward you, except the voice is not quite right. It's like hearing a recording where you can tell it's the same person, but there's a layer missing. And I don't see you because you're not there. And I find the fence, but I'm not on the side I think I'm on. And the gate is closed where I thought it was open, and I think, it's fine, that's normal, wind does things, don't be dumb. Then I see he stopped there. His mouth clicked shut like a seatbelt. He shook his head, flattened his palms on his thighs. "You know what? Never mind, I'm not doing this out loud." "Carl," I said softer than I meant, because the space between us felt like the inside of the cemetery. "I saw," but he was already walking back to the office. He raised a hand without looking back. "Goodbye. I didn't go to the cemetery for a while. That's not bravery or cowardice. That's just how routes work when you have excuses." I took more calls on the east side. I let younger guys handle the rancher complaints near the old fence. I told myself I was doing them a favor. Night work feels bigger than it is when you're 23, and the desert makes everyone feel like a hero for a minute. I did my reports. I didn't sleep any worse than usual. When my daughter called, we did 5 minutes of life and 2 minutes of awkward, and then hung up before either of us made a promise we couldn't keep. Then, 2 months ago, some kids knocked over the barrier again on that stretch, and nobody else was close. I told myself it was fine. Time is a solvent. I drove out with the radio on because people on talk radio never stop talking even when the weather tells them to. The sky was pale with old heat. By the time I got to the cemetery, it had that tinny sound the desert gets on nights when the temperature doesn't drop like it should. A pack of javelinas ghosted across the road ahead and vanished into mesquite. The air smelled like hot metal and distant creosote. I didn't stop at the gate. I told myself I wasn't going to stop. But when the barrier was set and the paperwork done, I found myself rolling to the same flat patch of caliche, the truck gliding to the same halt it knows from 100 halts before. I left the engine running. That felt like a concession to myself. See, I'm not really stopping. I looked at the gate. It was open. It usually is because nobody bothers to close it except the wind, and the wind is a sloppy caretaker. I didn't get out. I didn't need to. I sat with both hands on the wheel like I'd been pulled over and was trying to be polite. You can talk to the desert. It doesn't talk back, but it will listen in a way that makes you hear your own voice different. I said my brother's name. I told him I was sorry in the same words I've used 100 times. The apology that must sound like a recorded loop to whatever's left of him. It happened small. The gate hinged inward a few inches and rested. The wind was steady but not strong. The hinge gave a tired cry and stopped. A tiny thing. Everyday physics. It should have been funny, the way a place you fear can still be mundane. But my heart was already doing that old man thump and my breath had the shape of running in it, even though I wasn't moving. I put the truck in gear and rolled forward, because the only rule I trust is that you keep moving. I checked the rear view without meaning to. The gate was fully open now. No man in it. Just the negative space where a person could stand. If the story ended there, you'd be able to file it in the brain folder marked Odd Nights and go to lunch. It doesn't. The part that keeps me up is not the sighting. It's the shift that happened after. The world didn't crack. My tires didn't go flat. No shadow took the shape of a man and rode home in my back seat. But people started telling me like it was a harmless piece of gossip. Hey Kellerman, you know that old cemetery? Funny thing, every time I drive past it lately, it looks like someone's left the gate standing open. You'd think the wind would shut it. I didn't encourage it. I didn't tell the story. I didn't want to recruit anyone. But once at a diner in Alpine, a lady in her 70s I'd never met turned from the counter and said, apropos of nothing, "They ought to fix that latch." She didn't say which latch. I didn't ask. She sipped her coffee and nodded to herself like we'd come to an understanding about something we didn't name. Carl's gone. He didn't leave a number with me. That's okay. I don't think we have anything to say that we wouldn't hear the wrong way. I still take the route. Night driving is a habit, and habits are what I have left. Some nights the crickets cut out and the wind fills the space they leave. Some nights the hinge sings. Once I saw the figure again. Not at the gate, but 2 rows in, turned the slightest bit away like a man called by his own name from a distance he couldn't gauge. I drove on without checking if he turned to watch me go. You can put this down to desert tricks, to fatigue, to guilt that's looking for a mirror. The brain loves patterns and hates a blank page, and the land out there is the biggest blank page we have. You can find faces in clouds if you stare long enough. I know all the arguments. I use them on myself like a tired teacher uses the same lesson plan every year. But here's the part I can't argue past. Some nights when I pass that place and the gate is open, I get the taste of iron in my mouth like a penny pressed to the tongue. And every now and then, only every now and then, not enough to be proof, just enough to be a promise, I catch a shape in the rear view that shares a man's outline I know too well. Shoulders square, weight even, standing where a person stands when he's been told to wait. I don't slow. I don't speed. I don't call anyone's name. I keep my eyes on the road until the dark swallows my truck and the fence behind me is a line someone drew to keep a story from wandering. Maybe the desert doesn't hold grudges. Maybe it just holds places for us the way an old friend will hold a seat at a bar you haven't visited in years. Or maybe some gates swing because that's what hinges do and the rest is on us. I don't go in anymore. I don't test the latch. I don't see what I'm not strong enough to tell out loud. I drive, I breathe. I try to sleep. And when the wind rises and the crickets fall silent, I keep my hand steady on the wheel and tell myself that 1 more mile will wear down the feeling. It doesn't. Not really. Carl quit his job the next week. I still drive that route alone. Every time I pass that cemetery, the gate is open again, just waiting. And sometimes I think it's waiting for the wrong man to notice. tell this story to scare anyone. I'm telling it because it happened and I need it to exist somewhere outside my head. If you've ever driven the back roads outside Lufkin, you might know the church I'm talking about. A little white Baptist church set back from a 2-lane road that buckles in the heat. There's a graveyard beside it that's older than the paint on the building, older than the broken fence you see if you slow down around the curve. There's a pond on the far side of the fence that looks nice from the road, like a sheet of old glass tucked into the trees. Up close, it's not pretty. It's a heavy, still kind of water. It smells like wet cedar and damp iron. Mosquitoes lift off it in little clouds whenever the wind changes, which is almost never. My name is Rebecca, but everybody calls me Becky. I'm 36, a substitute teacher when they need me, and a single mom to a 7-year-old who mercifully slept over at my sister's place the weekend this happened. I don't sleep much myself. I haven't since my dad died last year. He's buried in that cemetery by the church, the same church he helped paint after the flood, the same church where he taught the older kids Sunday school. He said his grave would look out across the water and he liked that. He said the pond would keep him company. When the church announced they were going to sell the property, new congregation moving in, different plans, all of that, I felt sick thinking about Dad's headstone under weeds and mud while strangers drove big trucks over the grass. So I drove out there on a Saturday in July to tidy his plot and the ones nearby. I brought rakes and a 5-gallon bucket, bleach for the marble, a folding stool, gloves, a cheap soft broom, some fake flowers because it's too hot for real ones to last. My cousin Jared said he'd meet me and help. He's 29, long-haul trucker when he can get routes back in Lufkin between jobs. We're not close. We used to be when we were kids, but we drifted. There are reasons, but they don't matter here. We have that family thing where you share blood and holidays, but your conversations sit 3 feet away on a folding chair and breathe through their nose. I got there early, just after 8, because the heat's less mean then. Cicadas were already screaming in the trees like the sky was a big electrical box. Blackbirds walked along the gravel like they owned it. The pond looked flat and dull, like a coin someone dropped and nobody cared to pick up. I parked by the church and carried my stuff through the gate that always drags in the dirt because the hinges are rust-eaten. The grass was high. You could smell the humidity before you felt it, a green smell that sticks to your tongue. I found Dad's headstone, cleared the beer can someone had left on it. Kids hang out there sometimes. I don't think they mean anything by it. I raked leaves into piles and rolled sticks away with my boot. I stacked fake flowers off to the side and took a slow breath. I don't know how to explain it, but those first minutes felt soft. Like the heat was sitting back for once, like the cicadas were talking around me instead of at me. I hadn't felt any peace in a long time, not really. But there was a sliver of it then, kneeling on the damp ground, bleach smell in my nose, my dad's name under my hand. I wiped the stone and followed the letters with my thumb. I could hear the church's old ice machine groaning somewhere inside, and the distant tires of a logging truck, and that was it. I remember thinking, this is okay. I can do this. Maybe this is the first good day I've had since February. Jared showed up about half an hour later and didn't say much. He carried the big rake and one of those grabber claws for picking up trash. He wears sunglasses even when it's cloudy, which makes him look like he's hiding something even when he's not. He set down a cooler and told me he brought Gatorades. We hugged like cousins do, quick and not quite lined up. Then we went to work. The thing started small enough that I almost didn't mark it in my head. I was kneeling and scrubbing this black crust from the base of Dad's stone, and I noticed the pond. I couldn't see it directly. There were cedar trees and a row of older stones blocking most of it. But I saw a piece of it through a gap, a little triangle of water. And it rippled, a small circle like somebody had flicked it with a finger. I looked at the trees, no wind. The leaves were hanging limp, sun already pushing down on everything like a big hand. The ripple spread and died, and I told myself, fish. Could have been a turtle. Easy. I stood up to stretch my back, and when I did, I caught Jared out of the corner of my eye. He was a few markers over, bending to pull a wad of weeds from the base of a white cross. In the triangle of water, I could see his reflection too. His head and shoulders just a dark shape. It was ordinary until it wasn't. He straightened up, turned, and his reflection kept bending for a half-second longer. Not a lot. If you weren't already looking, you might have missed it. I was already looking, did you see that? I asked. He pushed his glasses up and looked where I was looking. What? In the water, I said, feeling silly as soon as I said it. Never mind, he shrugged and bent back down. We kept working. The heat got bad faster than I thought it would. Sweat rolled into my eyes and stung. We took turns at the cooler, chewing the ice we didn't drink. The bell inside the church, one of those little electronic ones that sounds like it's coming off a tape, rang the hour at 10. No one else was around. The parking lot was empty except for an old Ford Ranger and a silver minivan that looked parked there for months. Out on the road, the same logging truck came back the other way, and a big white SUV slowed, then kept going. A little after 10, I heard a splash and looked straight toward the pond. Not a heavy splash like a cannonball, just the plop of something dropping into still water. Again, no wind, no dragonflies skimming. The mosquitoes had thickened up enough that I wiped my arms with DEET like I was frosting a cake. I watched the triangle of water until my eyes went out of focus, then shook my head and went back to my work. We split the cemetery into sections without saying so. He took the newer side. I took the older stones nearest the pond. The ground there was softer, like footsteps had a memory. The names were half erased by time. There were little lambs carved on some of them. There were coins tucked into cracks. People used to leave shells and marbles. I found a blue one under a mat of moss and set it on top of the stone like that made it right. The air felt thicker by the pond. The shade along the fence was useless, a fake promise. The second weird thing was the rake. I had propped my rake against a cedar trunk, teeth down, handle leaning. I turned to pull debris from around a stone, and when I turned back, the rake lay flat on the ground, teeth pointing toward the pond like it was showing me something. "Jared?" I called out. I didn't want to sound like I was accusing him of anything, because why would he move a rake to play a prank? We weren't that kind of cousins, but the hair at the back of my neck felt cold in a way the air wasn't. He looked up from across the aisle of graves. "Yeah? Did you?" I stopped. The word I had ready was dumb. "Did you knock my rake over with your mind?" "Never mind," I said again. I righted the rake, stuck the handle deep in a soft spot in the dirt, and watched it for a second. Then I looked at the water. Another ripple, wider this time, like something long had moved just under the surface. We broke for lunch around noon. The church parking lot shimmered in the heat, the sort of heat that makes distance look like breathing. Jared offered me a sandwich from his cooler, a white bread ham thing wrapped in wax paper, and I ate it even though the bread tasted like freezer. We sat on the tailgate of his Ranger, and he told me about a route he was trying to get, hauling pipes down near Corpus. I told him about the school year, about a fifth grader who didn't like V sounds and called me Miss Becky Hargoff. We laughed the way people do when they're not really laughing at the joke. After we ate, Jared said he'd check the church for a bathroom. I told him to take the church key from my glove box. He took it and went toward the side door, past the rusty Coca-Cola machine that used to work if you kicked it. The door didn't open, and he came back and told me the lock had been changed. New congregation, new locks. He started to walk around the building instead, and I turned toward the graves again. When I looked up, I saw someone kneeling by my dad's grave. For a heartbeat, that's exactly what my brain believed and what my eyes showed. A shape, bent forward, hands on the front of the stone like they were reading the name out loud. The body was wrong for Jared, wider somehow, and the head was bowed. My mouth got ready to say, "Excuse me," in the polite voice I use with parents at the school. But the ground between us had no footsteps, and there was no sound of weight shifting. I blinked. There was no one there. "Just the stone with the bleach still drying and a pale fan across the base, Jared," I called. He came back around from the far side of the church, squinting. "What? Did you?" I started again and stopped, angry at myself for sounding crazy. I walked to my dad's plot and stood there until my heartbeat slowed. I could smell the pond stronger there, a cold, dead smell almost underneath the cedar and grass. I capped the bleach and made myself keep going. I didn't tell Jared about the person I thought I'd seen. I didn't tell him about the rake or the reflection thing either. I did ask him if he'd heard splashing, and he said he had, like fish probably. "Place is full of turtles," he said. "They sit on logs and sun and then jump in when they hear you." He shielded his eyes and stared toward the water. "I don't see any logs." We kept at it until the sky went that white-blue color that means you won't get any more clouds for the rest of the day. I was making a little pile of flower holder cones when Jared said, very quiet, "Don't turn around. Nothing in my body likes to be told that." I went very still. I stared at a chip in the marble and felt sweat make a path down my spine. "What?" I said. "There's someone kneeling over there," he said. "By your dad." My skin went cold. "No," I said. "There's not. I'm looking right at them," he said. He stopped. "They're gone." I turned. Nobody. The grass was pressed down like a knee had been there a long time ago. But it could have been anything. My throat felt tight. "You saw it?" I asked. He took his glasses off and wiped them on his shirt, which was soaked. "I saw somebody, yeah," he said.
Head down.
Like they were praying. He put the glasses back on and frowned toward the pond. "Weird thing is, I don't see any footprints." We both scanned the ground. It was damp enough that a crow leaves a mark when it hops. There was nothing between the path and Dad's stone. Only the places we'd stepped, and those didn't line up with the angle Jared had pointed. My skin felt too small. "I think we should finish up and head out," he said, trying to make it casual like we had errands. He looked around as if there might be anyone to hold him to a promise. We did good. We had. The cemetery looked different from when we pulled in. The stones looked cared for. The trash was gone. The grass hunched in neat rows like a haircut. I told myself that was what I was feeling. The sadness that comes after work like that, the ready-made melancholy of endings. Not fear, not anything else. I told Jared I wanted 10 more minutes to sit with Dad before we left. I said it like I was asking permission, which he didn't love. He nodded and said he'd load the car. He took the cooler and the rakes and walked toward the gate, boots rattling gravel. I watched him go and felt this strange surge of affection for him, for just agreeing to come out here and sweat through his clothes on a Saturday because I asked. We're not close, but we're not nothing either. That means something. It must. I sat on the little folding stool at Dad's grave and told him things I should have told him when he could talk back. I told him I'd been dreaming about water. I told him I felt tired down in my teeth. I told him Caroline, the little girl, had gotten a green ribbon at a reading thing in June. I told him I kept thinking of the last time he'd been near water, how he'd fallen asleep in his chair by my sister's pool, and how a wasp had landed on the surface and ridden this tiny wave from one side to the other. When I said that part, I heard it again, another splash, closer. I looked over my shoulder. The pond was right there. It hid behind the fence, but you could see the near edge, a strip of brown-green water where the grass gave up and turned to black mud. There was a sheet of algae, and a little bit of old tire and a plastic grocery bag caught under a branch like a jellyfish. The surface was still now. I stared at it until my eyes watered and blinked. There's a kind of stillness that isn't peace. It's the stillness you get when a storm has ripped everything out and you're just looking at the edges of what used to be there. That's what it felt like. The cicadas sounded farther away all of a sudden. The shade felt like it hid something instead of protecting me. I could hear water not moving. I know that doesn't make sense, but I could hear it. "Okay," I said out loud to no one. "Okay." I stood up thinking I'd grab the stool and the bucket and head to the truck. That's when I noticed the shovel. It was one of those short square shovel types, not the pointy kind with a wood handle, and it lay across the path a few feet ahead of me. It wasn't ours. We hadn't brought a shovel like that. The metal blade was clean but scuffed. The handle looked old. The varnish worn to a polish in the middle. It wasn't there a minute ago. I would have tripped on it. There was a sticky drip on the metal like sap or something, and a line of muddy water heading toward the pond. "Jared?" I called, and my voice came out too loud. "Do you have—" I started to say a shovel, realized how stupid that sounded, and stopped. I looked around. The parking lot was empty. The church's windows flashed light. The shovel sat there with the kind of presence a snake has when you notice it, like it had been in the world long before I saw it. I took a step backward, then another, so I wouldn't have to walk past it to leave. The path behind me wasn't really a path, just a way the grass leaned. I moved slow so I wouldn't slip. I didn't want to take my eyes off the shovel, but I glanced at the pond, and that's when my stomach turned inside out. The surface had changed. Not a ripple this time, not circles. It looked stretched, like someone had pulled a skin tight and pressed their palm against it from underneath. You know how your reflection is either perfect or broken depending on how the water sits? This wasn't either. The water showed me a reflection of the cemetery in that dull, flat way ponds do. The grayed-out trees, the far fence posts, a bird cutting across, but it showed them on a delay, like the world it was reflecting had a slow, separate time. A crow flapped from a post, and in the water the black wing lifted a beat later. The skinny shadows of headstones in the water shivered to a different wind than the one not blowing in the air. I felt dizzy like I'd stood too fast, and then I saw him. At first, it was just me. My own reflection in the water, small because of the angle. A dark figure at the edge of the pond. The skirt of my dress made a bleached-out shape. My hair a messy little blot. I lifted my arm to test the lag because part of me needed to prove this was a trick of heat and light. I raised my hand to wave at myself, and my arm in the water hung by my side, then lifted slowly, catching up, like someone remembering a move. As it lifted in the water, another shape bloomed up behind it in that broken glass surface. Not Jared. Broader. A head I knew as well as my own. The set of the shoulders. The patchy hair he never quite tamed. It was my father, standing behind me in the water, smiling the way he smiled when we came home late from church and he'd already set the VCR to record the game. Small and proud and a little sad. Every part of me went very quiet. Not calm. Quiet the way things get when there is more sound than you can process, so your brain turns everything down. I didn't look behind me. I didn't need to. The water showed what I would have seen if I did, and what I would have seen was my dad standing there. I could feel where he should have been by the temperature of the air on the back of my neck, like the heat there had an edge. He was smiling. In the water, he leaned closer, and his mouth moved like he was saying my name. He had that look he used to get when he wanted me to understand a thing without him having to say it, which usually meant I was about to get grounded or forgiven. "Dad?" I said stupidly, like how people on the phone say the other person's name even though the phone already told them who it was. The reflection of him kept smiling, and the smile deepened and then went thin. He looked, I don't know, apologetic, like he wished he could explain a math problem and couldn't find the words. His eyes shifted in a tiny way that meant when he was alive and solid and casting a normal shadow, that he was about to make a joke to soften whatever came next. I could smell cedar and mud. The pond's water slid against itself, quiet as someone rubbing a hand over a wet tabletop. I let out a little breath and found out I'd been holding it for a long time. "Dad?" I said again, and my voice broke. The me in the water lowered her hand, late. The me on the bank didn't move. The he in the water lifted his hand and set it on my shoulder, the shoulder of the me in the water. I felt nothing. No weight, no pressure, no temperature change, but my body registered it in the old way it does when someone reaches for you from habit. My muscles kept very still so they wouldn't push into a touch that wasn't there. There was a sound behind me then, just a small wet shift like a shoe in mud, and I made myself turn, because the part of your brain that wants you to survive says you need to turn and either see a person or see nothing. I turned, there was no one. The grass bent where we had walked. My stool lay on its side. The shovel sat where it had been, waiting. The trees kept their hot green. The air was await with no hands. I stood there in the big, dumb light, facing my dad's stone, and felt the most scared I've ever felt, which was somehow quieter than any fear I'd known. I turned back to the pond because I couldn't help it. The surface in my triangle of view showed only trees now, flat and late. My own shape in the water had drifted to the side as if I'd stepped left in a way I didn't. The father shape was gone. There were bubbles near the edge that popped without making ripples. "Becky," Jared's voice came from the gate, sharp and too bright. "You good?" I didn't answer right away. I remember picking up the stool and the bucket and stepping wide around the shovel like a person stepping over a sleeping animal. I remember walking down the path and feeling the sun like a hand on my head pushing me forward. I remember dropping the church key into my glove box and closing it quietly, like I was letting something sleep. I remember Jared's face behind his glasses, the skin around his eyes red with heat, and how his mouth opened to say something and then closed and then opened again and ended up on, "Hey, you okay?" "Let's go," I said. It came out like dry leaves rubbing. He didn't argue. He tossed the last rake in the bed and slammed the tailgate. The sound was too loud. It stepped on the cicadas and made them stumble for a second. We drove out slowly, the Ranger's tires humming on the road, and I watched the rear view like a bad passenger. The pond slid behind the cedar trunks and then was gone. I kept waiting to see someone in the mirror, standing up from the grass or stepping out from behind a marker. No one did. We got to the main road and turned left, and the air through the open windows felt like a hairdryer. I realized my teeth were clenched and made myself unclench them. My tongue tasted like pennies. "What happened?" Jared said after a mile. His voice sounded too big in the cab. "You looked like you saw..." He cut himself off like he knew the saying he was about to use and didn't want to have to hear it. "I saw Dad," I said. I don't know why I said it. I don't tell Jared things like that. I barely tell my sister. "In the water," I said before he could ask. "Not behind me. In the water. With me," he swallowed. I could hear it. "Okay," he said slowly. "Okay. I think he was trying to tell me something," I said. It felt true and dumb at the same time. Or maybe not. Maybe it was just, "Okay," he said again carefully. "We're going to your place or mine?" "Neither," I said. "I'm going to get Caroline from my sister's tomorrow, and then I'm taking her back to Nacogdoches. I'm not staying in Lufkin." I didn't plan to say that until I heard myself say it, and then I knew it was already decided. Something that had been holding me to the town had moved. Maybe it had always been the pond. He nodded like he'd been expecting that answer and turned the radio on to a station that wouldn't come in, then turned it off. After a while, he told me he'd seen the kneeling person again when he went to put the cooler in the truck. He said they were by my dad's grave again, head down, hands flat on the stone, and he genuinely thought it was me for a second. He said he shouted my name and the person didn't look up. Then they didn't move. Then they weren't there. He said he felt embarrassed saying it out loud. "You ever heard stories about that pond?" I asked. The question sounded like a child's, but if anyone would know a rumor, it would be Jared. He runs with guys who sleep in their rigs and know where the water sits heavy. "Just the usual," he said after a moment. "Old cemetery, old water. They say a kid went under in the 80s. They say a woman liked to walk there and didn't come back in the 70s. They say there's a truck under there." He glanced at me and looked back at the road. "They say a lot of things. Do they say water can remember people?" I asked, and I hated how my voice shook. He didn't answer. We didn't talk much after that. He dropped me at my place. He asked if I wanted him to come inside. I told him no because I didn't trust my hands to make coffee without breaking something, and because I wanted to sit alone and see how much of what I'd seen still existed when there were walls and air conditioning and a TV to fill the room. He touched my shoulder awkwardly, 2 taps, and left. I didn't sleep that night. I didn't even try. I kept going back to the edge of the moment when I saw him in the water and kept trying to stop myself before I turned to look. Like if I could make different decisions in the retelling, I could change something about the way it felt. The house creaked like houses do. The air conditioner cycled on and off like it was taking cautious breaths. Toward morning, a hard little rain came and knocked at the windows and left. I stood at the back door and watched it fall into the yard. I took Caroline to my sister's that afternoon and drove east the next day. I didn't say why. I just said I needed a change and that I'd be back. I kept my eyes away from any ditch water, any stock pond, any retention basin behind a grocery store. When it rained and the streets filled their low places, I looked straight ahead. I drove like a person who was trying to keep a promise she made to herself in a place where no one heard it. This was months ago. I'm writing this now because I can't shake the feeling that something followed me. Not in the jump scare way or the movie way, but in the quiet way water follows a low place. You don't see it go. You just look up and there it is, settled, reflecting something it shouldn't. There's a bird bath in my backyard that came with the rental. It's one of those concrete ones with a fake cherub on the pedestal that looks embarrassed about existing. It sits under a crepe myrtle that drops flowers into it in the spring and leaves in the fall. Most days I forget it's there. When it rains, though, even just a sprinkle, I feel my chest go small. The bowl fills and the surface turns that old glass color and I can't look at it. I tried once just to prove I'm not a fool, to watch my face. I lasted a second and a half before I felt the exact same stillness as before, like silence had weight. I backed away and shut the blinds. I don't keep water in glasses by the bed anymore. I don't turn the faucet on and stare while it runs. I try not to linger at the sink. When the tub is full for my daughter, I call her and leave the room. She asks why, and I tell her I'm trying to point my life in a different direction, and she says okay. The way kids do when they already have something else to think about. I don't go back to the church. The property sold. They posted pictures of the remodel on Facebook. New pews, new paint. They fixed the fence. They cleaned up the cemetery. They didn't mention the pond in the pictures. You wouldn't anyway. It's not something you brag about having. Sometimes I decide none of it happened the way I remember. Heat does things. Grief does worse. Sometimes I think I made my dad appear the only place I could make him appear. in a surface that already knew how to delay real things and make them softer. Then I open the back door and there's a shallow bowl of rain on the stand under the crepe myrtle, and I feel that thin electricity run up my arms and into my jaw. I think about how my dad's mouth made that little almost joke shape, how he wanted to tell me something we don't have a language for. I don't think it was a warning. I think it was an apology. For what? I don't know. I still can't explain the shovel. I asked the pastor from the old congregation if maintenance left tools out there back when they had workdays, and he said they hadn't done a workday in months. He said he'd lost a shovel out there once, a little square one in the mud after a rain. He said he never found it. He laughed when he said it, like it was a joke only he got. I didn't laugh. I was imagining the line of muddy water pointing at the pond like a string with a weight on the end. The other morning it rained before sunrise. I went out to get the mail, which had somehow ended up in a damp pile right by the bird bath. My neighbor's cat was sitting on the fence watching the yard like it owned it. The sky was that weird purple blue that makes you feel like you woke up at the wrong hour for your life. The bird bath was full. A perfect disc. Something floated on top like a little ship. One of the crepe myrtle's blossoms pressed flat. I picked up the envelopes and tried not to look. The cat flicked its tail and made that chirping noise they make when they think they might jump but decide not to. I realized I was holding my breath again. I realized my shoulders were trying to turn without me, trying to align me with the bird bath the way you face your dad when he says your name. I went inside. I set the mail on the kitchen counter and stood there holding the edge of the sink until my hands stopped shaking. I told myself what I'm telling you now, that I'm okay, that I can move forward, that some places hold on to the people who love them, and we don't get to decide what that looks like. But I didn't go back outside until the sun had burned everything dry. I waited until the bird bath was a ring of damp concrete and a little crust of dirt around the rim. I don't think the pond was evil. People make things evil so they can make rules about avoiding them. I think the pond was a mirror that forgot how to be fast. I think it kept a little of whatever looked into it and then let it go back. Late, when the day felt like that kind of day. I think it's been doing that longer than any of us have been around to notice. I haven't been back to East Texas since. My sister says the church looks good with the new paint. She says the cemetery looks loved. She says the pond looks the same. She says in August you can smell it from the road. I said earlier this isn't to scare anyone, and I meant it. But if you stop someday and walk through that cemetery, and the day is the kind of day that presses hard, and the cicadas are drilling through the air, and the pond looks like it's holding its breath, don't look too long at the water. If you do and you see me there standing a little to the left of where you are, don't wave. Don't turn to check. Just keep walking, past the oldest stones and the one with my dad's name, and out the dragging gate that leaves a line in the dirt, and into whatever sun there is on the far side of the fence. I left Lufkin the next day. When rain fills my backyard bird bath now, I can't look at it. Water's not supposed to remember faces, but I think that one did. I'm not a writer. I spent 35 years stuffing mail into the same row of neighborhood boxes and keeping my head down in Texas heat that made the pavement shimmer. I married a girl from church, Margaret, and I put my paychecks into the same bank in the same truck until the paint peeled off both. When she died in a car accident 30 years ago, I started sleeping with my hand on her side of the mattress so it wouldn't feel so empty. That habit never left. I still wear my ring. People comment on that like it's a cute detail and not just a hinge that won't come loose. A month after I retired, one of the guys from the VFW mentioned a volunteer cleanup at Shady Oaks Cemetery, out on the edge of Waco where the lots thin out and old oaks twist through chain link. That's where Margaret is. I'd been promising myself for years I'd take better care of her spot than the grounds crew did. The county mows, sure, but they're quick. They have quotas. They don't stop to flick mud off a marble angel's toes. Shady Oaks has a look that's hard to put into words. Everything is a little too quiet, like the wind gets muffled by the moss. You smell wet dirt even when it hasn't rained, and the angels all have hairline cracks that make them look like they're thinking twice. There's a sag in the land, so fog sits there longer than it should. The first time I brought Margaret's headstone flowers, I remember noticing how the birds didn't sing so much as flit, dark shapes moving from one shade to another. The cleanup crew was mostly church folks and a handful of kids doing community service hours. There was also a boy named Luke, 17 maybe, Stringy, restless, the kind of kid who clicks his jaw unconsciously and throws his voice to the back of every group. He wore a cap with the brim pulled low and carried the rake like it might turn into a skateboard if he wished hard enough. He kept cracking jokes about ghost OSHA violations and zombie unions, and I liked him in spite of myself. It's good to have that kind of noise if you're working somewhere that makes the quiet loud. "Mr. Mercer," he said when someone introduced us. "They told us to pair up. You okay with that?" "Sure," I said. "You rake, I haul." "My grandpa's a retired Marine," he said, tossing leaves into a tarp. "He's grumpy too." We spent most of the morning cutting back brambles along the fence line. Sweat rolled down the inside of my shirt and made everything stick. I showed him how to tie a quick knot in the corner of the tarp so we didn't lose half our load. He nodded like he'd tucked that away in a back pocket with other tricks. By late morning, the church group took a break under the big live oak near the entrance. Someone pulled out a cooler. When you're 58, you feel every bottle cap snapping open like a small blessing. We sat apart from the main shade near the older section. That's where the stones get simpler and the names get harder to make out. The paths are narrow and there's this feel like the air is colder by a degree or two. Hard to explain. You just notice your skin react. That's when Luke found the bench. It was tucked under a tangle of vines just off the path, half smothered by leaves. I'd never seen it before and I've visited that place more than I care to count. It didn't look like the county's usual concrete seats. This was wood. Thick planks, hand-planed by someone who knew how to coax a board into being flat without making it dead. The arms curved inward like hugging a space. At first I thought it was rotten, but when he kicked the leg with his shoe it sounded solid. Old but solid. You can tell the difference if you've ever tapped a stud in a wall. "Check this out," he said. "Vintage." "Careful," I said out of habit. "Could be full of ants." He brushed leaves off with the back of his hand. There were initials carved into the top slat, worn thin like a thumbprint that got erased and redrawn too many times. Some letters you could make out, LK maybe, and an A pushed into a corner. The rest were overlapping, like a lot of caretakers had used the bench as a progress report. It had that rubbed look of a place people sat to breathe. "Probably the old caretaker's bench," I said, "from when they still had one man living on site." "How do you know that?" "I used to see him when Margaret first—" I stopped. "Long time ago. Little shack by the gate. Old man with a thermos. What happened to him?" "He retired," I said. "Or maybe he just stopped showing up one day and nobody asked questions." Luke sat down, leaning back with his arms along the top like he owned the horizon. "Still sturdy," he said, and then he flinched. He didn't jump. It was tighter than that, like someone pinched the nerves behind his shoulder. His face changed in a way I've only seen a couple times. Once when a dog got his hand by surprise through a fence, and once when a doctor told me there was nothing else to try. "What?" I asked. He frowned and rubbed his back. "Nothing, just—" That felt weird. What felt weird? It's like something cold touched me. He looked behind the bench like a prankster might be crouched there. "Nothing. Probably the wood," I said. "It's been in the shade." "Yeah," he said, but he didn't lean back again. We finished our break. The rest of the volunteers drifted away from the shade like a flock loosening. Tools clinked. The breeze settled everything into order. From where I stood, the bench looked like it belonged there. The way some things do when your brain decides to edit them into the scene. I made a mental note to ask the grounds crew about it. They keep an inventory of fixtures. I figured any extra seat would be appreciated out here. The rest of the day ran together. We trimmed vines off a stone that had a lamb carved into it for a toddler who didn't make it to her second birthday. You learn to do that with care, pulling ivy like hair, not like a rope. Luke stopped joking as much, which I chalked up to heat. I kept watching for ants on the bench when we passed, for no good reason. "You ever feel like you're being watched in places like this?" he asked, quiet. "All the time," I said, "but mostly by birds." He laughed at that, and the air felt lighter for a second. Then around mid-afternoon, when the sun decided to push through the clouds just enough to make the shadows crisp, he said, "Do you hear that?" We'd been making that kind of small, steady noise that gets into your bones. The scrape of a rake, the swish of leaves, the shuff of a boot. The problem with steady sounds is that any break stands out like a cough in a chapel. "Hear what?" I asked. He stared over my shoulder for a beat longer than felt comfortable. "Breathing," he said, "like behind me." "Probably me," I said, but I had been holding my breath. We went back to work. He kept touching his back. He looked at the bench like you look at a person you're trying to recognize from a long time ago. Around 4, folks started packing up. You could feel the energy change, the way people start to think about their air-conditioned cars and the cold drink waiting at home. The coordinator thanked us. I stood by Margaret's plot and noticed a spray of weeds coming up along the edge I'd somehow missed. I knelt to get them. It felt wrong to leave them there overnight, like a stain on a shirt you know is going to set. "I'm going to hit the back path and collect the last of the branches," Luke said, waving the tarp. "I'll meet you at the gate." "Don't take too long," I said. "Sun's going. Shady Oaks at dusk isn't pretty. It's not the cinematic kind of blue hour where everything looks like a painting. It's more like the light goes behind a curtain for a minute to change clothes and you don't really want to see what it's doing back there. The shadows get crowded. The air turns from warm to just damp. Branches that didn't move all day decide to try out a new position. I finished the weeds and wiped my hands on my jeans. I didn't see Luke at the gate. I walked the back path toward the older section. My boots didn't feel loud, but the sound didn't seem to go anywhere, like I was walking on a sponge. "Luke," I called. I kept my voice casual. You learn not to put panic into a name unless you're ready to spend the rest of the day hunting. No answer. A mockingbird shot from a bush in a way that always feels like it's aimed at your heart. I told myself a story quickly. He'd found something else to clean, or he'd seen a friend drive by and hopped the fence to say hi. I do that at night when the house makes a noise. You build a little bridge of reason so you don't have to stand over the hole. In the older section, past the angel with a chipped nose and the family plot with 4 identical stones in a square, I saw the bench. Same one, same spot. Except it didn't look the same. I don't mean it moved. It just looked new. The top slat wasn't as sun-bleached. The legs looked darker, like the stain still had some life in it. The initials were clearer. I could read them. LKAJ, a heart with no names. And right in the center, small and deep and fresh enough to look shiny at the edges, L. Luke. I said, but quieter. The tools we'd used, his rake, my loppers, were on the ground midway down the path like someone set them down fast and didn't plan to be long. The tarp sat folded neat. People don't fold tarps in a rush. They don't. He would have thrown it somewhere and gone looking for a bathroom or a joke. The bench creaked. Not much, just that sound wood makes when weight shifts on it, except there wasn't anyone sitting there. The creak kept going for a second as if someone had just stood up and the wood was telling you about it a beat late. I told myself the obvious. Wood moves with temperature. The day cools. Boards expand or contract. That's all. Even as I said that in my head, I realized I was listening for breathing. It's the sound you pay attention to when someone's hurt in the next room. It makes a rhythm for your fear to dance to. I walked around the bench because the mind loves closure. I knew better. There was nothing but leaves and the shape an animal might make if it pressed its belly into soft dirt, and thought that would make it invisible. The ground behind the bench was damp. Not dark damp, not muddy. Just a spot like someone had been sitting there when the rest of the world was dry. It smelled faintly of iron and old water. "Luke," I called again, and my voice went sideways into the trees and came back as if someone else had said it. I heard it a second later in the brush. My voice, the same tilt, the same stupid tremble I was trying to keep out of it. "Luke," it said like a practice run. I sat down on the bench. I don't know why. You do dumb things in the name of normal. If I sat, then the bench would be a bench again, not a stage. The wood was cool, not cold. Cool like a countertop in a house that hasn't had an oven on all day. "Okay," I said out loud because you can talk yourself into staying when you hear yourself talk. Think, he's a teenager. They wander. He probably left with his buddies and forgot to say something. He'll text the coordinator later and they'll laugh about it at the debrief. From behind me, something breathed. Long and careful, like someone trying not to be heard. When you live in a small house with someone for 30 years, you know what breathing means. Excitement, sleep, sorrow pretending to be sleep. This breath sounded like waiting. I didn't turn around. That may sound like a tough guy decision, but it wasn't. Turning around would accept the game. I stood up instead. The bench creaked again, the same way it does when someone gets up after you do. The damp spot looked darker now. "Luke," my voice said from the trees, except I wasn't speaking. Then from somewhere else, another voice, his, said, "Mr. Mercer," but it sounded like he was humoring someone. It sounded like he wasn't allowed to put fear into it. I walked toward the trees because that's what you do. You look where the voice is. You don't sit and debate. I pushed aside branches and scraped my arm on something that had hooked me. Behind the trees is the fence line, and beyond that a strip of dry grass no one claims, and then a road that goes nowhere important. There was no boy between the bench and the fence. No footprints on the dry path. No humor flickering in the leaves. I'm not proud of what I did next. I left. I called the coordinator from the truck and asked if Luke had signed out. He hadn't. I told her I thought I'd miscounted boys and I was going to drive by the gas station down the road to be sure. You learn when to tell the truth. You learn also when the truth requires 3 more truths you can't carry. I drove to the gas station and stared at the rack of windshield wipers. I bought a water I didn't drink. I went back to the cemetery slow. The gate is old iron. It has a stubborn swing to it like an old man with one shoulder bad. It was closed. The coordinator's car was gone. So were the trucks. The light was purple now and the sky had that look it gets when it's trying hard not to rain. I walked to the bench. It looked old again. The initials were as vague as before. I told myself it had been the angle of the sun. That happens. Shadows pull details out of things you don't notice otherwise. The damp spot was still there though, not big. Just an oval the size of a person's weight. I crouched and touched it with 2 fingers, not the way a detective does in a movie, but careful. My fingertips came up clean. No mud, no water. Just cold. I called the sheriff's non-emergency line. I told them a volunteer hadn't checked out and I had his first name and description, and a cap with a tear on the brim. They came, slow but polite. A deputy shined a flashlight in all the places it makes sense to shine. He asked me questions in that calm way they must practice. When did you last see him? Did he say anything unusual? Was he on anything that you know of? Did he have friends there? I said I didn't think so. I said he acted like a kid who didn't trust silence. Kids leave, the deputy said. They jump fences and walk home and forget to tell the grown-ups. If he doesn't show up by morning, Mama will call. Then we all know what we're dealing with. What's that? I asked. Something that isn't a kid wandering off, he said, meeting my eye and then choosing not to hold it. I didn't bring up the bench. I didn't have the right words for it. There's a damp spot is the kind of sentence that makes you sound unhelpful. I went home. I lay in bed with my hand on Margaret's side like I always do. The breathing in the room sounded like mine. I repeated that to myself. It's yours. You're hearing yourself. You're getting old. When you get old, your body starts talking to you louder. At 2:11 a.m., my phone lit up. Unknown number. I picked it up because sleep wasn't something I could do anyway. Mr. Mercer? It was the coordinator. Her voice was tight. Luke's mother says he didn't come home. What do we do? I asked. She filed a report. They're going to ping his phone. They asked if any of us drove him. I told them no. They might call you. Okay, I said. And I stared at the ceiling and counted the slow sweep of the fan and waited for dawn like it was a bus that's always late. They didn't find Luke. Not that day, not the next. Nobody said the word dead. They used words like missing and runaway and contact if seen. His friends posted his picture, the one where he's holding fish and smiling but his eyes are on the camera like he's translating what the photographer wants into his own language. I kept going to the cemetery. Not every day. That would look desperate. Just enough to be a man visiting his wife. Each time I told myself, this time you don't go by the bench. That's like telling yourself not to think about an itch. I went by the bench. When I say it looked newer sometimes, I know how that sounds. I wrote it down to be sure I wasn't rounding off the edges of memory. I took mental pictures. One Saturday, the letters looked deep again. A week later, they were just grooves. And the damp spot, always the damp spot. The rest of the ground would be dusty, your footprints like soft hollows. But just there, like someone had just stood up to stretch, there would be a mark. If I came in early, it was there. If I came just before closing, it was there. It didn't spread or dry. It just existed. One afternoon, a little girl walked past with her grandmother. The grandmother had that white hair that doesn't look weak, like a silver coin. The girl carried a bunch of silk flowers. She sat on the bench to rest while her grandmother trimmed around a plot with scissors. After a minute, the girl shivered. She looked behind her and then stood up, rubbing her back. She didn't say anything. She just looked at the seat like it had said her name wrong. The damp spot under the bench looked a little bigger when she left. I asked the grounds crew about the bench at last. The foreman said they didn't add it. He said the county had a plan for benches and this wasn't one of them. He told me a story about an old caretaker who used to sit in that general area with his lunch and bread for birds. We always called that the caretaker's bench even though it wasn't the same one, he said. He died there once. Well, not died there. He had a heart thing there. They got him to the hospital and he died there. But you know how people talk. What was his name? I asked. Lyle something, he said. Or Lionel. First name started with L. I can ask around. I'm just curious, I said. Not the weirdest thing in here, he said, and we both smiled like you do when you excusingly agree with a secret. That night I dreamed I was sitting on the bench with Margaret. We didn't talk. Dream silence can be good, but this wasn't that. This was like the air had weight to it, like water pressing on your ears in the deep end. I kept glancing at her, and every time I did, she moved a little farther away down the bench, calmly, like the way a person will slide over to give someone else room. But there wasn't anyone else. I woke up with both hands on her side of the bed and my mouth open like I'd been trying to breathe under a blanket. When you see your own name where it shouldn't be, something in you snaps into focus. It isn't dramatic. It's simple. You are in a world that has rules and then someone shows you a corner where the rule is written in pencil. On a Sunday, a month after the cleanup, I walked by the bench and saw that one of the initials in the middle I had never been able to make out was now as clear as polish. DM, my name. Same letters carved plain, no flourish. Fresh. The edges still rough like a fingernail snag. I didn't tell anyone. Who would I tell? Look at this. Did you do that? No. Then who did? I would have to keep saying I don't know like that meant the same thing every time. I brought a small pocket knife, the one my father gave me when I was too young to deserve it, and I shaved the letters down until they were just a suggestion under the grain. I told myself I did it out of respect for the bench, not fear, but the wood was harder than I expected. It had a resistance to it that made my hand feel old and weak. Weeks turned into a new season. The nights cooled. The grounds crew put away the big hoses. People brought pumpkins to lean against stones because that's the kind of thing humans do. Every time I visited, the bench waited. Sometimes old, sometimes new. Always sturdy, always that damp spot. I started sitting across from it on the edge of a family plot's border, the way you might sit apart from someone on a bus. We had, I realized, a relationship. I didn't like that thought. One late afternoon when the air was thin and you could smell rain making up its mind, I heard the breathing again. Not the wind, not an animal. It had the rhythm of someone counting the seconds between lightning and thunder. I looked at the bench. It looked back in the way objects do when your brain keeps its own tally of stairs. Then I heard my own voice from the trees, the exact way I say my own name when I answer the phone for telemarketers. Daniel, it said. I walked to the bench. I placed my hand on the top slat. It was cold enough to make my palm sting. The wood felt damp, but when I pulled my hand back, it was dry. The initials were a blur again. I couldn't tell if that helped. I know what you're doing, I said. You're saving my seat. As soon as the words left my mouth, a 3-note sound came from the bench. Not crying, not laughter. Something like the hinge of an old lid that's been opened and closed enough times that it has its own voice now. It wasn't louder or softer than anything. It just felt designed for my ears. The damp spot under the bench darkened and then lightened as if it had taken a breath and let it go. They never found Luke. People move on because they have to. His mother put up signs that got bleached to pastel shades by the sun. His friends shared his photo until other things replaced it in their feeds. The coordinator looked at me in the grocery store with a nod I couldn't read. The deputy had a new case. The bench stayed. I go once a month now, sometimes more, because routine is a bridge and I'm not good at swimming. I bring clippers for the little grasses that try to crawl over Margaret's stone. I talk to her like I'm a man on a long drive with a passenger who's dozed off. I walk the path past the angels and the family plots. I check the initials even though I tell myself I won't. And every time, without fail, the ground under the bench is damp, oval-shaped, quiet, exactly the size of someone who has just risen and doesn't want to make a fuss. I've never sat there again. People think that's because I'm afraid. I guess I am, but fear isn't the right word. It's more like respect for a game I wasn't invited to but keep getting dealt into. I bring a rag sometimes and I think about wiping the seat out of habit, the way you'd wipe a chair on a porch before you sit. I never do. It doesn't seem right to disturb a thing that knows its purpose. Here's what I know and what I don't. I know benches are for resting. I know the man who used to take care of that place ate his lunch there. I know a boy sat there and felt something cold and then he was gone. I know wood can hold memories like it holds old stains. I know I hear my own voice in the trees when I shouldn't, like a message I left myself a long time ago and forgot to check. I don't know if the bench is old or new or both. I don't know if it's a doorway or just a piece of furniture that learned a trick. I don't know if it wants anything or if it just keeps a routine like I do. People ask me sometimes why I keep going back. Nobody says it out loud, but they mean, why keep picking at a bruise? I go back because Margaret is there, and also because it's a place that shows me what I am. A man with a ring on a hand that still reaches for a space in the bed that isn't warm. A man who believes in schedules because something about the clock feels sturdier than hope. And a man who knows there's a seat in the shade with his initials somewhere under the grain, and that one day, maybe soon, maybe not, that seat will hold his weight better than his legs will. If you ever visit Shady Oaks, you'll have to find the bench yourself. I could tell you where, but directions don't help much in a place like that. It's near the old section where the names fade. It's under an oak that drops leaves in handfuls. You'll know it when you see it. Don't sit because I told you not to. Don't sit because you think nothing will happen. Sit if you're tired. Stand if you're not. Either way, listen. There will be a breath that isn't yours. There will be a damp oval on the ground that wasn't there a second ago, growing faint as though heat is a hand pulling it away. You will hear a voice call a name from the trees. Not loud, not a scream. Just practice like a friend testing your doorbell before they press it. It might be your name. It might be mine. It might be nobody's. If you go leave a place at the end of the bench, you'll feel silly doing it at first, like setting a table for a guest who's late. Then you'll feel like it makes sense. I don't sit there, not because I'm afraid, but because I think it's saving a place for me. People think West Texas is empty. It's not. It's just wide, and the things that live in the wide spaces don't hurry. They wait you out. They let you talk yourself brave, and then they show up when you're tired enough to doubt your own feet. My name's Hank Dorset. I'm 50, and until a couple years ago, I was the ground supervisor for the city. Streets, parks, the water plant easements, that kind of thing. I carried a ring of keys that could rattle a coyote off a sandwich. I don't carry them now. There's one key left on my chain, and it opens a shed out back where I keep a folding chair and the good shovel. On the anniversary, I sit there with a flashlight and tell myself I'll be ready this time. I never am. People in Amarillo know Pottersfield in a general way. It's not the cemetery with granite angels and flower vases. It's a bare patch outside town, more wind than dirt, with an iron fence that paints rust on your palms if you grab it. It's where we put the unclaimed. The crosses are simple. Some are just steel rebar bent into a T. The ground is so dry you can hear it when it settles. This tired little sigh like a house after you've turned off the TV. On a hot day, the whole place smells like dust in the inside of a welder's mask. I didn't mind it much. We kept the fence tight and the weeds down, posted the signs twice a year, and every 6 months I hauled a truck out there with a crew to fix what the weather had eaten. The only time it truly bothered me was during storms. Lightning makes the hill look alive. It brings detail into places that are usually just gray, and sometimes you wish you hadn't seen those details. The year we lost a man, it was one of those storms. If you remember the spring squalls we got a few years back, when the clouds came in low like they were dragging chains, that's the season. We had 3 guys on the crew that day, plus me. One of them was a kid named Aaron, maybe 22. He had that new employee bounce, the kind that makes you tired if you watch it too long. He cracked jokes and walked faster than he worked. I liked him anyway. He reminded me of my boy at that age, back when he still called to say he'd be late. We were replacing fence posts on the north edge when the sky dropped. I told them to load up. The rain was sideways by the time we hit the truck. Lightning popped close, too close, and the sound sat on my chest like an uncle. I counted heads. 1, 2, 3, where's Aaron? He'd jogged back for a glove, or maybe he said it was his phone. I never got that part straight. I told the other 2 to stay in the cab, and I went out yelling, bent against the wind. The rain stung like gravel. I could see maybe 30 feet in front of me. The crosses came in and out of view like they were walking too, heading south ahead of the storm. I called his name until my throat turned raw, and then I heard it. This short bark of a laugh that wasn't a laugh, not really. It was the sound you make when you find the thing you were worried you'd lost, but what you found is worse than losing it. I found where the ground had collapsed, old subsidence. We fill voids when we find them, but the field is older than our maps and older than a lot of names. The hole was maybe 4 feet across and the mud was this black mess at the bottom. I slid in up to my knees and grabbed handfuls of wet clay, shouting for the others. And by the time all 4 of us were there with ropes and a pry bar and every bad idea in our heads, the hole had spread and the sides wouldn't hold. It sucked at us. I felt something brush my shin that wasn't a root. We called 911 when we should have called 10 minutes earlier. And then we waited some more because rescue trucks don't fly. We never got him out. The next day in better weather, we shored the sides and brought in a backhoe and we still never got him. The ground in that exact spot is tight as a fist. We placed a marker, a steel cross with a little brass plate just outside the collapse. Aaron's folks did what they could. They cried dry tears. We told a story we could live with, which is that the storm took him. The truth is, the field took him, the way it takes everything that has nowhere else to go. After that, I drank more. Not like a problem, not yet. Just enough to relax the pictures in my head when I lay down. I kept working. Potter's Field got a bit quieter. We went at noon instead of afternoons. I didn't go alone if I could help it. The night I'm writing about was 2 years after the storm. We'd had teens hopping the fence. Social media is like a key. Give it a lock and it will try it. They were filming night challenges, playing tag between the crosses. We'd replaced the padlock on the gate twice and the hinges once. The city got a couple complaints from nearby landowners about cars kicking dust on the shoulder. I volunteered to check the fence after hours. I said I'd swing by after dinner, give it a once-over, drop off some new no trespassing signs. I told my boss I'd call it if I saw anything worse than a loose strap. It wasn't bravado. I just wanted to be the one to decide if the place was fine. I wanted to tell myself it was Officer Rhonda Till met me out there because there'd been a report of a bonfire a few nights prior. I knew Rhonda from when she was a rookie and had to shoo RVs out of city parks before football weekends. She'd turned into one of those cops you want to wave at even if you're doing 6 over the limit. No nonsense, but she laughed easy. She was maybe 35 then, hair in a tight ponytail, cheekbones like she'd stolen them from a statue. When she stepped out of the cruiser that night, the halogen bar on my truck threw this hard light over everything and she squinted, grinning like we were trespassing together. "Brought the bright one, Hank," she said. "Trying to grow tomatoes out here?" "This light keeps coyotes honest," I told her. "And you look better in it than I do, so it's not completely wasted," she groaned. "Save the charm for the fence." "You said teens?" "Yeah, late-night documentaries. Last week somebody cut the chain and tried to hang a belt off that corner post like a noose. Real respectful." "Kids," she said, but her voice had a sour edge to it. She looked over the field and the wind pressed her uniform pants tight to her shins. You could hear the halogen hum. Coyotes yipped somewhere far off. The fence rattled like a bag of nails. We walked the perimeter slow. I carried a bucket with signs and screws and a cordless driver. She slung a flashlight sideways in that copway, beam underhand ready to throw the light if it bit. The weeds on the outside of the fence were brittle and silver at the edges like an old man's hair. I reached out to steady a post and came away with rust on my fingers, red-brown, the color of the pan under my dad's pickup where it sat all year waiting to catch oil that never fell. "You know this place always stinks like blood?" I said. It was a thing I'd noticed when I started. The smell isn't blood, but it is iron. The scent of old rain and fence, even on calm days. Rhonda sniffed and shrugged. "Smells like Amarillo," she said. One big barbecue with no meat. We were joking because it was midnight and the field wanted us quiet. Either you joke or you get hushed. I prefer laughing to being shushed. We made it to the far corner and I unlocked the gate to check the chain. It was tight, uncut. The new lock still shiny where the rain hadn't hit it. I swung the gate a couple inches to feel how it sat and latched it again. My halogen splashed across the first few rows of markers. The crosses cast shadows that were long and thin like scratches on the ground. The grass, or what passed for grass, lay flatter in certain places where the earth had hummed its way down around whoever was left beneath. "Looks good," I said. "Let's walk the path to the north line. If those kids found a way in, it'll be where the fence bows out over the creek bed. We can pop right back out without crossing too many." "Yeah, folks," Rhonda said. "You can call them folks." "Yeah," I said. "Folks," we stepped inside. I don't know why, but I always tiptoed. I've climbed fences into backyards full of German Shepherd and I never tiptoed there. At Potter's Field, you want to leave no wake. We took the gravel path we'd scraped between markers. It's not much, but it keeps your boots from sinking when the ground breathes. That's what my old boss used to call it. I aimed my flashlight ahead. The beam flickered, just a hiccup, and then came back full. Cheap batteries, I thought. I tapped the cap and it steadied. "Hey," Rhonda said. "Hold up." Her voice got thin on the last word. I turned and followed her beam. She was pointing at the dirt just off the path, near a marker with no name, just a number stamped crooked. Boot prints. Fresh. Clear enough that you could see the ripple of the sole. Size 9 or 10 maybe, the kind of print a guy leaves when he's not trying to step light. There were 4, 5, 6 prints. They started near the marker and walked in a line toward the gate. The dirt was soft from the wind earlier, top layer loose as flour. You could tell the prints hadn't been blown in. "Okay," I said. "So someone came through the gate." Rhonda swung her light the other way. No prints back toward the rows. Nothing leading the other direction. No parallel set like you'd expect if somebody came in and then went out. Just the one line like someone walked out from the middle and left. Maybe he walked in barefoot, I said. It sounded stupid as soon as my mouth made it. Or he fell out of the sky, Rhonda said. She smiled to tell me she was joking, but it didn't reach her eyes. "Let's follow them. If this is tonight or last night, maybe there's a cigarette butt by the fence. Something to give me an excuse to scare a kid's dad." We followed. It felt rude, like we were reading a note not meant for us. The prints crossed the path and then angled toward the north fence where the land dips. My flashlight hiccuped again, a longer flicker, like someone had pinched the wire. A cold crawled up my sleeves. I lifted the light and stared at my hand, expecting to see the battery cap loose, but it was snug. "Hear that?" Rhonda said. I didn't. I was listening to the hum of the halogen back at the truck and the hush of grass milling against itself. I shook my head. She tilted her head, like, "You know when someone's in the next room and they say your name?" Not loud, just enough to make you think you imagined it. "Your name?" I asked. She chewed her lip. "Yeah." I was about to wisecrack. I had a dozen jokes about admirers in the afterlife lined up, but the wind nudged the tall weeds and a thin, dry voice slid through like a ribbon getting pulled between your fingers. I couldn't make out words. It wasn't a whistle or a bird. It was close to a whisper. It sounded like the word till over and over, breath on a bottle, till, 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 until my brain did the lazy thing and filled in the front. Rhonda till. "Wind," I said. "Fence slats. They vibrate. It makes a voice if you want it to." "Tell that to my spine," she said, and she half laughed, quick and eager, like if she convinced me she wasn't bothered, it would convince herself too. We walked a few more steps and the prints stopped. Not faded, stopped. The last one was deep at the toe, like whoever made it had leaned forward mid-stride. "Okay," Rhonda said. "Nope. Hang on," I said. I stepped forward and leaned down. The dust at the edge of the last print was crisp. I touched it with a fingertip and it sloughed like sugar. No crust, no damp. Nothing that would make a partial. The wind was on my neck and it was steady and it wasn't filling the print. That takes time even here. I looked back toward the gate. The halogen light pooled hot and bright around my truck. Beyond that, it was just night and more night. I tried to think of some physics that would make this fine. Somebody walked backwards for a while and laughed about it and then erased their steps with a branch. But dust forgives everything except being told what to do. Drag a branch and it leaves comb marks. There weren't any. "Let's go," Rhonda said. "This is dumb." "Fence?" I said because we still had a job. "Fence," she agreed. "We'll check the bow and call it." We headed on, not saying much. My light dimmed, flared, dimmed again. I shook it and it died all the way for a beat. Like something big had walked between us and the truck and swallowed it. And then it came back and I pretended that didn't happen. When we reached the north line, the fence did what fences do when they're tired. It leaned. I pushed it back upright and screwed 2 of my signs into posts. The metal sang under the driver, this hollow ring that sounded like tapping a cowboy boot heel on a bar stool. Rhonda shined her light out over nothing, watching the little creek cut its shallow gash through the dirt, and I watched her shoulders. They were stiff. "Almost done," I said. "Good," she said. "I don't know. I feel watched?" And yes, I know that's the cliche. "Coyotes," I said, because it felt better to offer anything. "Coyotes don't whisper my name," she said. We turned back toward the gate. I kept the signs between my arm and my side so they wouldn't rattle. About halfway across the field, right where the gravel path starts again, there was this little patch of dust that never settles, like a scab that won't take. We stepped into it at the same time because we'd walked this route 100 times, and the dust puffed and draped down again, and then a boot print appeared between us. It didn't form like your brain wants it to, not from toe to heel. It just was there, complete. And for a half second, the dust in it slumped a little more, like whatever had pressed there had lifted and the ground had exhaled. We both stopped so hard the bucket swung and hit my thigh. Rhonda breathed in through her nose and out through her mouth like she was about to run. "Back to the truck," she said. She didn't shout it. The words were clean and even. That made it worse. We backed up at first. You watch too many movies and you think you're trained for that, but you're not. Your ankles want to turn and bolt. We kept our lights on that print and then on the next one because of course there was a next one. It landed ahead of the first by a yard, then another by 2 yards and then another. And if I'd had a yardstick, I would have told you that the steps were different. Longer, shorter. Like whoever it was hadn't walked in a long time and was trying the motion on to see if it still fit. We made it to the truck. The halogen sang. The cab light came on when I yanked the door. I threw the bucket in and Rhonda put one hand on my arm, not grabbing, just grounding us both. The wind tapered off like a hand leaving your shoulder. I don't do a lot of dramatic looks back, but I did that night because my body insisted that I know where the threat was falling from. The prints we'd watched started at that patch of dust, ticked forward a few paces and then veered to the right toward the south rows. Toward a cross with a brass plate my hands had bolted on. The line of prints marched straight to it. They stopped in perfect presentation, toes touching the cross's shadow. I didn't say his name. I don't say it out loud much anymore. It's not a magic trick. It just feels like there's a cost to it. The brass plate had the name and the date of the storm, and that was enough. I looked at Rhonda and she looked at me and we stood there waiting for the night to add a sound to match what we were seeing. Instead, my flashlight went out for good. "Keys," I said, and my voice came out small. We left. That's the truth. If you were hoping I'd tell you we walked back down there together like heroes and pressed our palms to that cross and asked some question that unlocked a door, I can't give you that. We got in the truck and drove back to the road with the halogen still on, and we sat in the pool of light and let our lungs argue with our hearts about whether we'd actually seen it. Rhonda radioed dispatch and said we'd checked the fence and it looked fine. She didn't mention the prints. I don't blame her. On the way out, she said, "You said you lost a guy in a storm." "Yeah." "That cross we saw." "Yeah." "You think She didn't finish. "I think the ground keeps its own books," I said. I don't know where that came from. It sounded smart in the cab, and then it sounded scary. And then it sounded like something you say when you realize you've been whistling past a place that has better ears than you do. I didn't sleep that night. I went out back and sat in my shed, the one with the folding chair and the good shovel, and I kept the light on. My yard is fenced. There's a little run of flagstone out the back door that my ex-wife used to water potted hibiscus on. The dust in this town is fine as thought. It gets on the stones even when it doesn't feel like wind. Around 3 in the morning, I saw a smudge of it near the steps, and I told myself that was nothing. It was. It was nothing. I went back to work the next morning and filed my report about the fence. I didn't write about the prints. I didn't tell the crew. I did start pouring whiskey into my coffee, not a lot. Just enough to smooth the edge off the idea that I might be called back out there after dark again. Rhonda stopped by the shop a few days later. She didn't ask me out for a drink. We're not that. She leaned on the doorframe of my office and said, "You doing okay?" "Fine," I said. "You need anything?" "Nope." She nodded and knocked the frame twice with her knuckles and left. Sometimes the best thing someone can do for you is show up and then leave. I quit the city the next spring. I told my boss it was time, that I wanted to fish more and see if my grandkid could be bribed into visiting with the promise of a dirt bike. The real reason is, I got tired of avoiding that road at night. I got tired of the way the halogen hum lived in my head like a bug you can't find. The first anniversary after that night came around and I didn't mark it. I don't keep a calendar for the bad dates anymore, but your body marks it for you. I woke around 3 and the house felt like a balloon that had been rubbed and was about to cling to something. The yard was quiet. No wind. I thought, okay, see, you made it a year. and nothing is weird. And then, I opened the back door and stepped out and I saw the prints. They weren't in the grass because the grass was short. They were in the dust that had settled on the patio stones and on the concrete like a veil. Boot prints, not wet, not painted. Dust displaced, edges fine. The first one was at the gate by the garbage cans. The next was closer to the steps. The next was on the top step. I followed them with my eyes and they went right up to my back door and stopped. No return path. No smears like someone had wiped their feet and gone inside. Just a line drawn from the street to my threshold. I didn't wake the neighbors, I didn't call Rhonda. I stood there with the door open and I tested the air for anything besides old air. There wasn't anything. There was a quiet that had weight to it. The prints stayed until the wind took them the next day. The second anniversary it was the same except there were more. They came across the yard on a track that wasn't quite straight, like the walker had watched a bird or a far plane for a step or two. They stopped at my door again. No handprints on the knob. No rattled latch. The dust lifted gentle that afternoon and it was like nothing had happened except I know something had. The third year, I sat in the shed with the shovel and I told myself I'd open the door at the right moment and swing it for the solid air where a chest ought to be. There are worse plans. I sat there and watched the step and around 3 a.m. the dust prints came one at a time appearing whole, arriving like mail, and I didn't open the door. I don't know if a shovel would do more than rearrange dust. I haven't been back to Potter's Field after sundown since that night with Rhonda. I drive past in the day sometimes. The fence has new posts now. The city upgraded the gate. People always upgrade gates. I don't think locks bother what's out there. I think it's polite. That's what scares me. I think it waits until you're ready to be spoken to and then it says your name in a way that makes you admit you heard it. I share this here because I know there are folks who understand the itch a place can put under your skin. I know there are others who've stood in their kitchens at 2 a.m. and listened to a house take a breath, and they've told themselves it's the ducts, the beam, the neighbor's garage door. You don't need me to tell you what you heard. You only need me to tell you that you're not the only one who didn't go check. Because you were sure if you did, you'd find something with your name on it. Sometimes I wonder if I should pour a path of water around the house on that date. Watch for footprints turning muddy instead of dusty. As if weight would prove something and proof would help. But what would it help? If I caught a shape in it, then what? You would read this as a story about a man who saw a shape. You might ask if I drank that night, and I'll tell you I did not. You might ask for a picture. I never take one. That feels like giving it a face. I don't think it wants a face. Last month, Rhonda called me. First time in a while. She said she pulled a night shift and took a cruiser past the field because a pickup was parked by the shoulder. She ran plates, nothing bad. And when she stepped out, she said the wind did that thing again. Whispered the last syllable of her name like someone practicing it. She said she went home after and made coffee and poured some out on the dirt in her flower bed. She didn't laugh when she told me that. I didn't either. Some places keep their own calendar. Potter's Field has mine. It's not on paper, and it doesn't need me to show up to keep the appointment. I quit the city. I keep my halogen in the shed. I oil the hinge on the back door every so often so that if it ever opens at 3 a.m, it will do it like it's meant to. Smooth and calm, not like something forced. I don't pray exactly. I just say not tonight, because in a town like ours, that's as close to a contract as you get with the wind. Anyway, if you've read this far, thanks. I don't know what anyone can say to make it less weird. I'm not looking for attention. I'll be outside again in a few weeks, the date I don't mark, sitting with the shovel by my ankles and the halogen dead, and I'll try to be brave and open the door when I should, and I'll probably fail again because I like my heart beating inside me. You think you'd be different? That you'd throw the door and step onto the first print and feel the weight of it come up through your toes and grin at the sky and say, I remember you? You might. If you do, come knock and tell me how it went. If you don't, if you stand in the doorway and breathe and then lock it softly so you don't wake the dog that died last summer, I'll know you read this right. It's getting dusty again out back. The wind's picked up a little. I can smell iron, but that might be from the shovel. Maybe I'll oil the handle. Every year, there they are. By morning, neat as a plan someone wrote in pencil with space left to correct the mistakes. They never lead anywhere, just stop right at my door. My name is Calvin Turner, but everyone who's known me more than a week calls me Cal. I'm 31, and at the time this happened, I was clawing through the last big piece of a history master's program that had already eaten 3 summers and most of my social life. My thesis was supposed to be about micro-migrations and forgotten communities across the Ozark borderlands, which is a fancy way of saying I drove around to places no one thinks about anymore, asked the oldest people I could find what they remembered, and photographed what time and weather were doing to the stones that proved those places existed. I liked that last part. Limestone goes soft in Missouri heat, and the names slide off it like soap. There's a story in that if you know how to look. I wasn't supposed to do the limestone plot alone. My girlfriend Ellen came along because I'd promised we'd treat it like a road trip. She's 27, smarter than me in practical ways and tired of pretending my obsession is charming. We packed a cooler, playlists, and one of those car phone holders she said would keep me from killing us on a gravel road. She brought a paperback she never got to open because I always found another place I just needed a few shots of. We hit the cemetery on a Sunday afternoon in late July, when the air felt like a wet towel you couldn't get off your face. The place sat behind a brick schoolhouse built in the 1920s and abandoned sometime in the 70s when the county consolidated. You could tell all that just by the windows. Tall with that Art Deco arch at the top, smashed in a pattern kids had perfected, and sunflowers growing out of the dark behind them. The gravel turnoff had half a sign left, Oak G Sh, and a piece of hand-painted plywood wired below it, Cemetery. Someone had spray-painted an arrow pointing down a path. The cemetery itself was the size of a baseball field, if you counted the brush along the fence line. The grass came up to Ellen's shins and her shoes were wrong for it. Bees were working the wild mint like they were late for something. The air smelled green and sweet and a little rotten where a limb had come down and torn bark. And every time the breeze pushed the grass, the whole field looked like it wanted to lie down and sleep. Limestone markers leaned at the angle of people past 70. Some had names softened to chalk smudges. Some had dates the rain had hung onto like scraps of a torn letter, 1879, 1901. On a few, you could still make out symbols, doves, clasped hands, but most were just pale, rounded things returning to the dust they were carved out of. Haunted? Ellen said in that voice that says she's humoring me. Or just sad? I looked through the camera. Honest, I said. Honest is better than haunted. I meant it. When you spend time with these forgotten places, you get protective. People turn them into Halloween props, and I hate that. The real thing isn't jump scares. It's the way a name slips. It's the way families stop visiting. It's a mown path getting narrower each year until even the mower forgets where to go. I started working. My method is slow. Wide shots of the plot itself, then close-ups of markers that still had something to say, then the ones that were almost gone because the almost tells a story too. Ellen followed, reading names out loud because she knows I like it. Zebulon McCrae, she said, laughing a little. Luvina P, and that P is trying so hard to be a real P. She kept brushing aside grass and saying the names like she was introducing us. It made me like her more and feel worse at the same time. That's a talent she has. Then she said, what about this one? The way her voice changed made me stop. It wasn't a stone, not really. It was a lump of limestone almost exactly the size and shape of a loaf of bread, sunk into the earth at the head of a little mound. No inscription, no symbol, just that pale hump and a small toy car resting on top of it. The car was one of those cheap die-cast ones from the 80s or 90s, boxy with chipped red paint and a black base where the wheels were. The kind a kid would shove along a windowsill. Marker got replaced by a field stone, I said. Happened a lot when families ran out of money. Or the original just dissolved. Ellen leaned in, balanced on her heels. No name, though? Why bother marking it at all? So you don't forget where to talk, I said without thinking. Sometimes words like that slip out and I hear how they sound only after. She looked at me like she'd been considering a joke and changed her mind. We laughed a little, because that's what you do. And I took pictures of the lump because the absence of a name is as much a fact as anything else. Ellen flicked a beetle off the toy roof and then wiped her fingers against her jeans in a way that was careful and quick. I took a few more shots, and when I looked up, she had that thing she gets, a thin line in her forehead as if she's trying to catch a thought that keeps slipping away. We finished. Bees kept humming. The sun kept pressing down. By the time we got back to the car, we were salt at the edges. Ellen slammed her door and then immediately apologized like the door had a feeling. I dumped memory cards into a little hard drive, marked the Field Notes app with the cemetery name and GPS, and we rattled back to the road in a cloud of dust that tasted like pennies. I wouldn't remember the toy car again until the next day. That's probably to my shame. We'd booked a room at a motel off the highway with a plastic-lit vacancy sign and a pool half full of leaves. The lady at the desk had a paperback with a tanning bed romance cover, and the kind of friendliness I always think is real until I hear the same sentence 3 times. We ate grocery store chicken in the room and watched a game show where the prize trips were always a romantic getaway to Branson. The AC rattled but kept us alive. Ellen sat cross-legged on the bed flipping channels until she landed on a true crime documentary, and then immediately said nope and switched it off. We left the TV blue and humming. She wanted to go get ice at midnight. I didn't. She went anyway, barefoot in my hoodie, and came back shivering with the bucket. "There's a cat living in the ice machine," she said, setting the bucket down. "Either a cat or a very small ghost. Did it say anything useful?" I said, "Yeah," she said. "It said we should go home tomorrow." We laughed and fell asleep in a way that felt like surrender. I woke up twice, once to the sound of someone dragging something heavy down the balcony outside the room. We were on the 2nd floor. And once to that dream where someone is sitting on your chest. I told myself it was the AC vibrating the bed. That worked until 2:30 a.m., when the ice machine knocked and a car went by and I realized I could see our dashboard through the gap in the curtain. A little rectangle of moonlight had found it. The toy car was sitting on the dashboard. I stared for a long, stupid minute before I understood what I was seeing. It was the same chipped red, the same black base. It was placed right in the middle, front to back, with the nose pointing at our windshield like it wanted out. I got up quietly, like I could get closer without spooking it. Ellen stirred. "Bathroom?" she said, not really awake. "Yeah," I said, already sliding my shoes on. "Be right back." The air outside hit me in the same wet towel way. The parking lot had that sodium orange lake of light thing going on. 3 semis idled at the far end, drivers sleeping with the engines running. A guy in a tank top smoked and stared at his phone. The ice machine knocked again. I went down the stairs feeling like the dream chest sitter had followed me onto the landing. Our car was locked. I knew, because I tried the handle and felt the resistance and saw the red dot blink on the dash. The toy car sat in the dash light like it had always belonged there. I did that slow look around people do when they've lost something important, and they hope someone is about to step out of the shadow and say, "Just kidding." No one did. I unlocked the car and reached in. The dashboard was warm. The toy was warm. I don't know why that mattered. I left the door open until the beep, beep, beep got on my nerves and then shut it and let my reflection fall away from the glass. Maybe some kid from the motel found the toy by the cemetery sign, I told myself. Maybe there's a dozen like it. Maybe yours isn't yours. Maybe you're tired. I took the toy upstairs and set it on the dresser. Ellen blinked at it and then at me. I said the thing I knew she would hate the least. "Found it in the parking lot," I said. "Weird, right?" "Weird," she said, the word empty and flat. She pulled the blanket up. I put the toy into the top drawer under the motel Bible, like I could put it to bed. We slept until 9, the way you do after you've convinced yourself the thing you saw didn't matter. In the morning, the toy car was on the dashboard again. We had only one key card for the room, and we'd both used it to go in and out for ice in the parking lot check. I brought the bucket with me and pretended that's why I was going back out in case anyone saw me being a lunatic. I did the whole dance again, check the locks, check the windows, look around like a lost dog, and then I carried that little thing back up into the room and set it down on the table beside the motel TV where Ellen could see it. She thought I was playing a joke. She really did. And if you know me, you might think the same because I have a habit of laughing at the wrong time. I tried to say the right words and only made it worse. "I didn't," I kept saying. And then, because she was looking at me like I'd let her down in a small, stupid way, I wouldn't. "Then we left it on the dash when we left the cemetery," she said. "And you didn't notice it last night, and I didn't notice it last night, and now we noticed it." "Occam's razor, Cal. Occam's razor says it should be in the drawer," I said. With the Bible, she went to the drawer. She opened it. The book was there, right on top, with that fake gold edge blinking. The space where the car had been was empty. "That's not funny," she said, and she said it in a way that meant I had lost some chip I wouldn't get back easily. We argued. I talked too fast and she talked too slow, and the words unspooled like a rope we both tugged until our hands hurt. At some point she said, "I'm not one of your stories," and I said, "I'm not trying to do that," and then we stopped. Because the sentence felt like a glass someone had dropped while carrying a tray of dishes. The sound kept ringing. We checked out late. The lady at the desk didn't look up from her paperback. It was already 90 degrees and starting to pull clouds out of the air like thread. We drove into a day that didn't care how we felt. The car's AC worked hard. The toy car sat on the dashboard as if it had been epoxied there at the factory. I tried to ignore it, then tried to talk about anything else, then tried silence. Ellen tried the radio, and it gave us a preacher from somewhere with a tower high enough to climb the hills, and then static, and then a classic rock station that sounded like it was broadcasting from the bottom of a well. Every song had a line about going home, which I would have found funny last week. When we stopped for gas, I took the toy and threw it into the trash can next to the pump. It hit the plastic bag with a sad little clack. I covered it with an old hot dog wrapper and walked away. Back on the highway, Ellen waited a full minute and then said, "Did you really throw it away?" "Yes," I said. "Okay," she said. "We didn't look at the dashboard for a while. It's hard not to. The way you resist checking your phone when it buzzes." We both held still like people in a car with a wasp, afraid our movement would make something happen. The road unspooled. A hawk tilted. A dead tire exploded into wires on the shoulder. We caught the first spit of rain on the windshield and made wipers squeak. We passed a billboard for a fireworks stand that was closed 11 months of the year, and then somehow opened just when you needed it. The clouds opened and the world went gray. "Don't," Ellen said, when my eyes cut toward the dash. "I'm not," I said, and then I did. The toy car was back, just where it had been. Nose pointing at the glass, Ellen saw me see it. She went very still, the way a deer goes still if it hears a twig. She nodded. "Turn around," she said. "What?" "Turn around," she said, cracked and low. "Either you did this and we are going to have it out right now at the source, or you didn't, and we are going to have it out right now at the source. There are some choices you don't want to make on a highway." I took the next crossover marked for authorized vehicles only, and felt bad about it like I was stealing. The rain picked up. We backtracked in a streak of spray and wiper slap toward the county road. We didn't speak. I could feel my heart living in my throat. I tried to imagine a version of this where we both laughed about it later. If that version existed, I never found it. The schoolhouse looked worse under rain. The sunflowers had their heads bowed like they were praying. The mint went dark and sent up a smell like medicine. The cemetery felt smaller and meaner. We stood under one umbrella and walked to the limestone loaf with the toy on top. The toy on the gravestone wasn't there. Ellen looked at me like she wanted to press my skull between her hands and see what fell out. "Well?" she said. But the word blurred because the rain was doing another thing, not just falling. It had eaten a line of soil along the edge of the mound so that the loam slumped, and I realized the mound had never been as wide as I thought. A little channel ran along its base and emptied into a shallow sink on the downhill side. The earth there had pulled away just enough to show what was beneath. Bones look like nothing when you first see them in the ground. You think stick. Your brain says roots. Then you see the curve of a little coupling, the ball end of a joint, and the stick name falls away and another one takes its place. And all the air leaves your chest. In the rain-wet soil, just visible through the peeled strip of earth, a small curve of rib showed. The brown white of old bone that hasn't seen sun in decades. It was exactly the size of a kid's palm. It was much too small. Ellen made a sound like someone had shut a door on her mid-word. I heard her breath go uneven and then speed up. My umbrella shifted and water hit the side of my neck, cold and insistent like fingers. We didn't call anyone. I should have. This is one of the parts that make me feel the worst when I tell it. I have reasons, bad ones. The place felt like it didn't want that. I felt like I didn't want anyone's eyes on it. The skull of the schoolhouse watched us with its smashed windows. The bees were absent, tucked into somewhere that made sense. The storm grumbled across the valley. Somewhere a dog barked in shelter. "What now?" Ellen said, not a question. "I'll fix it," I said, and I heard how little I was in those words, but I meant them. We went back to the car and got the little camp spade I keep in the trunk and the dirty beach towel and the bag of emergency snacks that always melts into a honeyed mess by August. We came back to that place and I dug, not much, just enough to make the earth heavy and wet in the towel. When I scooped along the washed-out edge and packed the soil back in, I didn't touch bone. I didn't go near it. I followed the channel back upslope and found where it had cut, and stomped the lip closed and set stones to break the flow. I felt like a trespasser on a trespass, like this wasn't for me to do. But I kept doing it anyway because my hands knew and my head didn't. Ellen stood with the umbrella and didn't look directly at the place. The way you avoid looking at a roadkill animal you can't help already. She had her arms crossed in that way that looks angry and is really just trying to keep you inside. "I'm sorry," I said when we got back in the car. The toy sat on the dashboard like a minimalist decoration that had been chosen on purpose. Ellen looked at it and then at me, and then out at the schoolhouse. "I'm sorry," I said again. She said, "Take me home." We didn't speak on the way back to the highway except once, when she asked if the tires were low and I said no and then checked anyway. Because checking is what you do on days when trust is a smaller thing than it had been. The rain pinned us to the road with a straight white noise and Goodyear hiss. We passed the sign again and the fireworks stand and the dead tire wires and the hawk, who had sensibly found a fence post. The toy car didn't move. I noticed I could hear it even over the rain, the faintest plastic rattle like the wheels didn't quite fit their pins. Every bump made it whisper. Back at the motel, we got our overnight bags and the charger we always leave plugged in. We said quick, careful things to each other and then we drove north. We didn't stay another night. The AC blew hard enough to make my eyes dry, and Ellen turned away and watched the slip of the world in the side mirror. At a rest stop, I took the toy and slid it under the soda machine where I couldn't reach. I felt stupid doing it stealthy like the machine would tell on me. In the car again, Ellen started to say, "Did you?" and then stopped because she didn't want to be the one to ask. The toy car was back on the dash before we hit the on-ramp, as if we'd just forgotten seeing it there. Ellen cried one header's worth and then clamped it in. "Take me home," she said again. And this time she meant her home, not our home. That wasn't a surprise. I drove her to her apartment and carried her bag to the door and put it down and said I'd call. She said, "Please don't," and then "not yet," and then "I'm sorry too," and then she shut the door. Carefully like a person leaving a sleeping child, I sat in the car and watched the little red toy sit in the dash light while the hallway light behind her door came on and then off. Then I drove to my place. I parked. I left the car under the street light and I went inside with all the lights on like a coward and sat in my kitchen pretending to read a stack of articles I was already behind on. The car made a sound at least 3 times that night even though the street was smooth. Maybe it was just the plastic cooling. That's what I told myself. Maybe I've been telling myself for too long. The next day I went back. I didn't tell Ellen. I didn't tell anyone. I took the spade and some heavier rocks and a scrap of rebar from the shed. I drove 2 hours down and another 20 minutes along that county road that teaches you how many shapes a pothole can be. I passed the school bus from some other route and a guy hauling hay and a girl on a dirt bike. The sun had punched the storm out of the sky. The day felt new and mean. The schoolhouse looked the same and worse. The sunflowers had shrugged off the rain. The mint had stood back up. The cemetery lay under it all like a family trying not to bother anyone. I walked straight to the small mound with the loaf of limestone. The earth I had packed had slumped again. Not much, just enough to show me I'd done a poor job and that the problem wasn't just the rain. Something was sinking by inches year by year, the way a rotten box buckles if you keep pushing it into the ground. I got down on my knees. I talked out loud. I know how that sounds and I don't care. I told whoever, whatever was under there that I was trying to fix what the water had done. I told them I was sorry the stone had gone soft and the names had gone with it. I told them about how people get busy and forget and how that's the worst part, the forgetting. I said I had brought rocks to make a lip and I was going to dig a little channel to the side where the water could go instead. I said I would not move anything that wasn't mine. As I scraped, the soil slid away like it wanted to. And there, against the ribs I'd seen through the wash, was a small black rectangle of rusted metal, the size of a matchbox car base. The rest was missing. The little wheels were there, fused, set at weird angles. One had a ring of orange rust like a halo where it had corroded onto something and then come free. The metal looked thin and cheap, the way toys used to be when you could buy them at the counter for $0.25. It was tucked against the ribs as if it had been placed there under a shirt. It made the shape of a child more real than any bone could have, and I felt my scalp pull tight. I didn't take it. That's important. I want you to know that. I didn't take it. I pushed the earth back. I set the rocks in a neat row along the uphill side of the mound. I tamped with the flat of the rebar. I moved the runoff line 2 feet to the right and dug it deeper and lined it with flat stones like a tiny culvert. I did everything you would do if you found a place like this and didn't want it to drown again. When I stood up, the toy car on my dashboard rolled across the dash inside my locked car and fell against the passenger door with a soft clack. It did it in that stupid, inevitable way a thing does when a grade is just steep enough. I unlocked the car. I picked the toy up. I set it on top of the loaf of limestone. It looked wrong there now, like I'd brought garbage to a table. I took it back and sat in the driver's seat and held the wheel and felt like I had nothing to do with it anymore. I sat until the windshield heated and the sweat behind my knees made me feel like I'd peed myself in grade school. I started the engine. The AC yawned. The radio found static and then found a man giving farm reports with a voice like gravel. I didn't go to the sheriff or the county coroner or the historical society. I should have. Again, I know. I told myself I needed proof, or context, or a way to say it that didn't sound like I'd lost my mind in a motel. I told myself if I handled it wrong, someone would put a fence up and mow everything into a green carpet and throw away the stones that still had names because they were tripping hazards. I told myself a lot of things. The summer slid by. The toy car rolled on my dashboard. Not often, sometimes big turns would do it. Sudden stops. The road that dips just before my street. But sometimes it rolled when the road was smooth. Sometimes I'd be sitting at a light and feel it tap the plastic like a fingernail. Sometimes at night I'd hear it settle itself. A tiny undersound you have to sit very still to catch. If you said I was primed to hear it, I'd agree. If you said the brain loves patterns, I'd say yes. If you said grief looks for a channel, I'd say that too. I didn't finish the thesis. I started to, then I didn't. The box of memory cards sat on my shelf like a heavy word I didn't want to say out loud. I told my advisor I was pivoting. He said he loved pivots and then stopped answering emails for a while in a way that told me I was becoming a problem he would need a sabbatical to fix. Ellen sent a short text once, a month out. Hope you're okay. And I wrote half a book back and then deleted it and sent you too and then shut my phone off for a day. We never fought about the toy car again because we never had to. The fight had folded itself into the corner like laundry you meant to put away and kept stepping over. There is a kind of peace in that. It's not the good kind. I drove a lot that fall. I started to check the rear seat every time I got in, and I know that makes this sound like a ghost story, but it wasn't like that. It was like the air behind me had a temperature. Like if I didn't look, I was missing something I had to admit if I wanted to get where I was going. I'd look in the mirror and sometimes the focus would grab the backseat fabric instead of the road, and the little blur of red at the edge of the dash would become the whole world for a second. I got used to that, the way you get used to a bad knee that tells you about the weather. I went back to the cemetery once more before the frost. The rocks I'd set had held. The edge hadn't slumped again. The mint had gone brown and papery, and when I crushed a leaf, the smell came up like a memory of a day I hadn't earned. Someone had cut the grass. The path was neat. I don't know who did it. That almost made me cry in a way the toy never had. I stood there a while and said the names I could still read, and the ones Ellen had said for me that day. And the ones we'd had to guess at because the P wanted so badly to be a P. I tried to say something to the mound with the loaf of stone. I tried to say I had done what I could and it had not been enough and that I was sorry for that too. The words didn't come, not in a way you'd want to keep. Then I got back in my car. I sat very still and listened. The road out was graded and gravel with long, friendly curves. I drove slow and the toy stayed quiet, but I could feel it waiting to settle where it wanted to be. I drove back to the highway and merged and kept my eyes on the white line, and three times I checked the mirror for the back seat, like I was expecting a kid to pop up and ask when we'd get there. That's it. There isn't a twist you don't deserve. No screaming tires or a white face in the glass. No cops at my door. No elderly man with a folded newspaper who tells me a story that explains everything and makes my chest unclench. If that man exists, he's not looking for me. The toy car still lives on the dashboard. I don't touch it anymore. I don't throw it away. That's a choice I'm making. Maybe a stupid one. You can tell me so. I won't argue. The road to the grocery store is smooth, but when I hit the seam by the turn lane, it wobbles and then settles like it had remembered something, and then decided to save it for later. I keep driving. I keep looking in the mirror. I keep expecting someone small to be back there, balancing the toy on the top of his knee, making little engine sounds under his breath the way boys do when they're trying to be quiet and failing. I don't have a lesson. I don't have a thesis. I only have this. Graves are for people who need a place to talk. Sometimes the person isn't the one under the stone. And sometimes, on a straight road under a soft sky with no one in the car but you, a thing you thought you understood makes a small, precise sound that shrinks the world down to what fits on a child's palm. Sometimes I hear that little car rolling even when the road's smooth. I don't usually tell stories like this out loud. When I do, I keep my voice low and try not to sound dramatic because I know how it sounds. I'm a traveling nurse. I've done night shifts in buildings where every monitor had a mind of its own, and I've been in houses where grief presses on the ceiling like a storm. I'm not jumpy. You can't be. In my line of work, I'm 47, widowed, practical to a fault, and if I ever come off superstitious, it's because I've seen people at their worst, and I know how much we project onto the dark. This was in late May, 2 summers ago, driving west from San Angelo toward El Paso for a short contract. I took the long way because I had a free day and a bad habit. When I'm alone, I stop for old graveyards. I photograph headstones for a heritage blog. Nothing fancy, just dates, names, a little historical context. It started as a way to preserve things that would get swallowed by the scrub and wind. It became how I talked to people when I didn't have anyone to talk to. West Texas changes slowly if you're watching it through a windshield, but when you pull over and get out, it hits you at once. The brightness, the flatness, the way the horizon eats noise. The land around Fort Stockton is like somebody poured white paint on the world and stretched it with a straight edge. Salt flats. You can taste the air, tang and iron, penny on the tongue. I remember swallowing twice and thinking, I should drink more water. I'd topped off in town. The guy at the gas station, older, with a Permian Basin cap and the kind eyes of someone who has outlasted a lot, pointed me toward what he called the Spanish cemetery, then corrected himself. No, sorry, the pioneer one. You'll see a chain-link fence, couple of mesquite. Not much there, ma'am, but folks still visit every now and then. He said visit like it was a verb with capitals. I smiled to be polite. He asked if I was traveling alone, and I said yes before remembering you're not supposed to say that. 2 teenagers picked out Gatorades and stared at me like I might be their future. There was a state trooper in the corner writing something in a notebook. He didn't look up. I wasn't worried. I left town with a paper cup of coffee and a bag of ice pressed to my wrist because the AC in my car has a quirk and decides to work when it feels like being generous. The road out there runs straight into nothing with long, shallow rises where the heat lifts up the distance and makes a mirage out of what's actually there. I found the cemetery because a blank place felt different than the blank places around it. That's how I'd describe it. The fence was newer chain link tied to old posts leaning like exhausted men. Inside, a scatter of low headstones, some fieldstones with hand-cut dates, 1 or 2 modern markers, and a rectangle of ground the wind had skinned clear. The white salt wasn't powder. It was crust. It broke under my boot like thin ice. The sound was nice, actually. Crick, crick as I walked. Okay, I remember saying out loud because when I'm alone I talk to my husband Hoyt. He's been gone 5 years. Lung cancer. We never had kids. If I tell this story to anyone, I can hear him ask from wherever he ended up. You gonna tell them the truth? And I say I am. I will. I parked off the road as far into the gravel as I could without getting stuck, turned off the engine and sat with my hand on the keys for a second, letting the silence make itself known. It had a weight to it like being under a too heavy blanket. I could hear the tick of the engine cooling, the blood in my ears. No bugs, no birds, no wind. When I opened the door, the heat got in like a hand and pressed me down. I carry a small pack for these stops. Camera, phone, water, notebook, sun hat. I set the hat on my head and laughed because the wind that bullied me in San Angelo was nowhere out here. My straw brim stayed obedient and flat. The flats were so white that if you stared too long, your vision hummed. Be quick, I told myself. I took the first few shots like I always do, wide of the layout, then methodical row by row, markers with legible writing first. then the ones that needed a second angle to coax the letters out of the stone. The oldest marker was a field stone with patience on it, as if it were telling me to have some. The newest was from 2001, which surprised me. This wasn't an active place. There were an even dozen decorated with old silk flowers bleached to the color of ghosts. Whoever put them there had done it a long time ago. Around the edges of the cemetery, the salt crust gave way to patches of powder fine as flour. My boots left clean prints in it. I took a picture of one of my own prints because I liked the way it looked. The impression had blade-sharp edges and showed the little rocks that were hidden by the powder. There's something satisfying about proving you were somewhere. Maybe 10 minutes in, I heard a child laugh. It was faint, like hearing a TV in a house down the block. One little burst, breathy and quick. And it didn't float in on wind or echo off anything. It was just there. I stopped and reached for my phone by reflex to check if I'd left a podcast running or something dumb, even though I knew I hadn't. I don't listen to anything when I'm working. I like the quiet, even when the quiet feels pointed. On my lock screen above the time was a thumbnail of a new photo. My phone sometimes pops the last photo up there because it thinks it's helpful. Only this one wasn't the last thing I took. I hadn't taken it at all, I tapped it. The picture opened, it was me. The angle was straight on, like a stranger had asked me to turn and smile. I wasn't smiling. I was standing beside a grave I hadn't gotten to yet, one without a headstone, just a low rectangle of dirt freshly mounded. In the photo, the dirt was dark like coffee grounds. My hand was lifted slightly, like I'd been mid-gesture. I know the way I stand, it was me. Behind my shoulder, the line where the sky met the white land was perfectly level. I turned and scanned the cemetery. Nothing. Just the fence, the mesquite doing their best deer impressions, the wide world, in my little car. The air, which had been thick, went syrupy. I licked my lips. They tasted like I'd been chewing on coins. "This is a bug," I said out loud. "Just a phone thing." I deleted the picture. I'm not squeamish. I'm also not stupid, so I pulled up my camera roll and checked the timestamps. All of my cemetery photos were there in order, with one gap where the phantom had been. I took a breath, told myself stories. Maybe my camera glitched. Maybe my thumb did something in my pocket. Maybe. I kept working. I purposefully did not go to the spot from the picture. I went to the opposite corner and focused on a marker for an infant. No dates, just loved. I knelt and took 3 angles, the third with the horizon in frame because flat lines calm me. My screen showed a black flash. When it cleared, a new photo had inserted itself at the top of my camera roll. Same composition, same me, different grave. Fresh dirt. Me not smiling. Me maybe frowning. This time, the brim of my hat cut a shadow across my face. I didn't feel any shade when the picture would have been taken. The sun had been unrelenting since I got out of the car. I said Hoyt's name. It came out of me like a cough. "Hoyt?" I said again, quieter, like if I said it soft, my voice wouldn't carry as far. I backed away without realizing I was moving. My foot found the crust instead of the powder, and that crisp crick lifted the hairs on the back of my neck. I deleted that one too. This time I turned the phone off and on. When it came back, there were both photos again. I deleted them, powered down, and tucked the phone into my back pocket as if turning away from the problem might keep me from making more of it. I stood still so long that when I finally shifted, my knees told me about it. I checked the road. Nothing. I listened for that laugh. The silence had texture now. The same way an empty room feels different if you know someone was in it. It felt like the quiet out there had to push to fit around something. I told myself I was being ridiculous. I went to work faster, comforting myself with familiar motions. Snap, lean, snap, record the names. I whispered a few of them out loud, which is a thing I do, even if it's weird. Speaking a name gentle is a way of respecting it. Patience, I said, gentler now. Loved. I had made a good circle when I noticed one of the square powder patches had new marks in it. Not my boot tread, smaller. Bare feet, maybe? The prints weren't crisp like mine, more like the edges had been licked, rounded. They ran from a break in the fence straight to where I stood, then veered behind my car. The rational thing would have been to be alarmed because a kid had wandered onto the flats. The irrational thing was that I knew in a place just past my last rational one that nobody had walked in that powder while I was there. I hadn't taken my eyes off the cemetery more than a handful of seconds at a time. I would have seen someone. I would have heard the fence rattle. I walked to my car because that's what the prince told me to do. I don't like being told. It made me mad at myself. My shadow didn't feel attached to me as I crossed. I said my husband's name again, then stopped saying it because it sounded stupid to call who wasn't there when I was in a place that wanted me to be very sure of who was. Behind my car, in the shade of the bumper, the little footprints stopped. They just ended, like whoever made them got scooped up or decided to stop being a body halfway through it. The shade under the car wasn't normal shade. It was thin, more like somebody had drawn a chalk outline of a shadow and forgotten to fill it in. My phone buzzed in my back pocket. I jumped. When I pulled it out, it was hot, hotter than the sun should have made it in that amount of time. New photo saved, it said, which is not a notification my phone is programmed to give. I opened the camera roll because I didn't know what else to do. It was me again, same distance, same honest angle. This time I was standing beside my car. The bumper was in frame. So was my face turned toward the camera the way you turn when someone says your name. The fresh grave beside me wasn't in the cemetery. It was in the flats just outside the fence. New dirt in a rectangle, soil damp and dark against the white salt crust. All at once, the air around me stopped feeling like syrup and started feeling heavy. You could call it barometric pressure if you want. I don't think it was weather. I think it was like knowing the exact moment a room you're in becomes crowded. Nothing you can put a hand on, but undeniable. I said no out loud like that would hold the line. I stuffed the phone in my bag, grabbed my water, took a swallow of warmer than body temperature plastic and told myself to pack up. I do not need to explain everything to myself. I only need to leave. On my way to the driver's side, I passed the chain link gate, which I had left open. Not wide, just enough not to scrape a tire. It was closed now. The latch had a wire twisted through it that I hadn't touched. There weren't any other cars. There weren't any other anythings. Hey, I yelled without meaning to, just to put a sound into it. The fence didn't bother to answer. I untwisted the wire. I did it slow because my hands shook. I kept waiting for someone to jump out and laugh. This whole thing felt like a prank for about 2 seconds at a time, and then it didn't. I slid the gate open, got in, locked the doors, started the car, put both hands on the wheel and looked into the rear view. There was nothing behind me. That would become the problem later, the way nothing had edges. But right then it was a comfort. I eased onto the road, which was 2 lanes of asphalt cutting a cruel line to the horizon. The tires spat a little gravel and then found their hum. I drove the way you do when you're pretending your speed is normal. I didn't check my phone. I focused hard enough that when the road ahead went wrong, I almost didn't let myself see it. A half-mile out, maybe less, there was a veil across the asphalt. Like fog, only this wasn't fog. It was white dust. It hung shoulder high, then dropped sharp to the ground and lifted again, making an X where it crossed itself. A long-armed cross slashed across both lanes. It shouldn't have been there. The day was still windless. Nothing had kicked it up. The line it made was too straight and too deliberate. I took my foot off the gas without moving it to the brake and let the car slow by itself. The dust didn't drift, it held. If anything, it thickened. I could hear the crunch of salt and powder under my tires even though I hadn't reached it yet, like the road was speaking ahead of me. When I got close enough to see through it, the dash went dark for a second the way it does when your battery loses connection. The radio, which had been off, turned on to static. Not white noise. Not even radio static. More like a cassette being chewed by a deck. Slimy and wet and stretched. There was a voice under it, and I don't know if voice is the right word so much as pattern. It was the rhythm of a child telling a secret to a friend. Breath, breath, laugh. I stopped. I put the car in park. I watched the eyes in my own face in the rearview mirror act like they belonged to someone who thought she could still negotiate with the world. I told myself, just drive through. I told myself it's dust. I put it in drive and went. The dust hit the windshield and didn't blow. It stuck in a film and then slid down the glass on both sides like frosting. The car jolted like I'd driven over something large and soft at once. I said, I'm sorry, out of habit, because I've run over armadillos and raccoons and anonymous pieces of tire. I wiped the windshield with the wipers. They squealed. The dust smeared like paste. Once I was through, it released. The radio stayed talking in that chewed tape way. I turned it off. It turned itself back on, which is something cars do when a system is shorting. I told myself that to pretend I still believed only in cars. I drove until the white got less absolute and fences happened and trucks happened and the world felt like something humans lived in again. I didn't stop until I reached Fort Stockton. When I pulled into the motel, one of those old motor court ones with doors straight to the lot, I realized my back hurt from gripping myself stiff. Check-in was a young woman with acrylic nails tapping her phone. She asked if I wanted ice and a second key. I said yes to the ice, no to the key. She offered me a map of local attractions. In the lobby, there was a framed postcard of the world's largest roadrunner sculpture, which I'd seen once and not needed to see again. In my room, I put the AC as low as it would go and stood under the vent. I didn't want to look at my phone. I didn't want to prove anything. But I had to. If it was some weird new feature I'd somehow turned on, the fix would be easy. If it was a person, I wanted their face. If it was neither, I didn't have a word prepared. I opened the photos. Every shot from the cemetery had a shadow behind my shoulder. Not a human shape, not a man in a hat, not a looming thing with claws. It was a density, a darker than dark space the size of a kid, not toddler, not teen. School age. It stood exactly where the air behind me had felt thick. The longer I looked, the more I thought I could make out fingers. As if something had reached up but stopped before touching me. The fresh grave photos were all there too, like I hadn't deleted anything. There were 8. In each, the grave was in a different place relative to me. Sometimes near the fence, sometimes under that mesquite. Sometimes to my left, once almost under my feet. The newest one, the one by my car, had something else in it I didn't catch at first. A smear along the bumper. As if a hand had dragged through powder and left an outline that powder could keep. 4 fingers and a thumb. I sat on the edge of the bed and waited for panic to rise. It didn't. I felt like I do on the 4th 12-hour shift in a row, like my emotions had gone on break without telling me when they'd be back. I tried practical things. I checked the file's metadata. The timestamps were precise and wrong. Some were time-stamped in the minute I'd taken them. Others were tagged for times I know I was driving. One was time-stamped 8 minutes into the future when I took it. The location data was accurate for the cemetery until it started saying, "No location available," like my phone had decided the flats didn't count. I plugged the phone in, turned it off, counted to 60, turned it on. The photos were still there. I deleted 2. 3 new ones took their place. In those, the shadow was closer. Not touching me, but less polite about trying. I called my friend Tanya because she's the kind of person who will tell you you're being insane, and she'll be right, and you'll love her for it. The call went to voicemail before the first ring. The screen flashed a weird message, no service, and even though the room had full bars. I'm not going to say the room suddenly got colder because it didn't, but the AC vent's steady hum got swallowed by another silence like the one on the flats. A bigger throat cleared a smaller one. That's how it felt. I defaulted to nurse brain. Check inputs, outputs, lines, leads. I put my phone face down. I waited 5 minutes. I turned it over. The lock screen had a new image. Me standing by the motel bed, head turned toward the door, the shadow behind me. The photo was from inside the room where I sat. I didn't scream. I said my own name out loud just to hear something I recognized in the air. "Marge," I said, and it sounded tired. The photo on the lock screen wasn't well lit. My shape was a dim cutout of gray on gray. The shadow was better defined because of course it was. It looked like it was looking up at me. I put the phone in the ice bucket and piled the bag of ice on top. I did it because doing anything felt better than doing nothing, and because I had the idea that cold might slow whatever this was, like slowing bacteria in a culture. I stood, grabbed the room chair, jammed it under the door handle the way people do in movies, and felt ridiculous. Then I sat on the bed and listened hard to all the sounds that weren't there.
"You might expect a knock?"
A voice, the laugh again. There was nothing. Night came and the white daylight that had felt so honest took its leave without apology. The world outside my window still belonged to the flats, even if the parking lot had a sodium light buzzing over it. I closed my eyes and saw not black but white. The white of glare burned into my vision. At some point, fatigue did what fear couldn't. I slept. I dreamed something bright and simple, a child's hand palm up catching sunlight like water. When I woke, it was because my shoulder ached from lying wrong. My phone was still in the ice bucket. The ice had melted to a cold soup. The phone itself had condensation on the glass and the rubber case had gone stiff. I expected it to be dead. It lit right up when I thumbed it. There was one new photo. It was nothing, just a square of white. I thought for a second it was a mistake. Then I zoomed in and realized that it wasn't white. It was a picture of salt. A thin crust. Veins through it like a map. The shadows fell wrong. They fell toward the light. I checked out early. The young woman with the nails asked me how my stay was. I said fine because I didn't trust my voice to say anything useful. In the parking lot, there was a film on the hood of my car. Faint. If I had been a better sleeper, I might have written it off as dust carried in on a morning breeze. When I dragged my finger through it, the trail I left was dark, like I'd written in something deeper than powder. I took side roads to Interstate 10, skipping the flats. I didn't need to see them again. I drove to my contract like a person makes normal choices, and then I did 12 days of 12-hour shifts and a couple of nights. There were other things happening in the world. I focused on those. I'm good at that. In my off hours, I kept going to the camera roll like a tongue keeps going to a chipped tooth. The shadow didn't appear in any new photos I took, only in the cemetery ones, except when I scrolled past a picture of my niece from months earlier, a birthday party with a grocery store cake, icing a color that doesn't occur in nature, and for 1/2 second the shadow was there behind my sister's shoulder. Then the image blinked and it was gone. I tried to make it do it again and it wouldn't. The phone doesn't do that unless it does. 2 weeks later, on my day off, I drove to the county museum in Fort Stockton. I told myself I was going for the air conditioning and the antique photos. I was going to ask if the cemetery had a record. I was going to ask if any kids were buried on the flats with no marker. As if knowing their names would make any of this logical. The little county museum had a woman at the desk who could have been anywhere between 40 and 70, and had the unhurried hands of someone who makes quilts by hand. I told her what I had in the blandest terms. Old cemetery. Weird day. Did she have a map of old plots? She squinted at me and said, "Which cemetery?" I described it. She said, we get folks sometimes. Traffic picks up and then quits again. That the one with the chain link and the mesquite?" I nodded. "There's a book," she said, and slid a binder over. The list inside was short. The names I remembered were there. Patience. Loved. A few Spanish names from the 1880s. No kids without markers. No fresh graves. When I asked about the salt flats, she looked at me longer than she needed to. "They're funny, those flats," she said. "You can lose your line of sight out there and not know you've lost it. People think flat means honest. It doesn't. It means if your angle is off by a degree, you'll never notice until you've missed your turn by 20 miles. She tapped the binder. "You be careful taking pictures," she said, not unkindly, like I was in danger of getting sunburned rather than something nobody has words for. Out there, it sticks to you. I didn't ask what it was. Sometimes you know a person means a general thing and a specific thing at once. Sometimes you let them. I went back to work. I told no one. I stuck to normal graveyards with trees and birds and stones that threw honest shade. When my contract ended, I drove east, not west, and I didn't stop for anything historical unless it was under a roof. I quit the blog because the thought of Julia from Ohio or Ruben from Dubuque scrolling across that shadow behind me gave me a cold I couldn't warm. I don't take pictures anymore. The exact sentence is, I won't. I haven't taken any of myself either. People get angry when you don't want to pose. They want proof that you were somewhere with them. They want a picture to remember you by if they need it. I tell them I'm superstitious. I tell them I had a scare. It's easier than laying out the facts like I'm at work presenting a case. When I say this out loud, and I only do when I've had a long drive and a shorter night and somebody asks me why I keep my phone turned face down, I keep the part simple. This happened. That happened. I don't spin it because I don't think I need to. I've never gone back out there. I've never seen the shadow in a new picture since, but sometimes in the afternoon when the sun slants a certain way in a hallway, and the light piles up on the floor in a clean rectangle, I get the feeling I'm standing next to something that thinks it's being polite by staying just out of reach. I won't tell you to avoid West Texas. People live there. People love it. It's good land for people who like space in their heads and on the map. But if you go onto the White Flats by Fort Stockton, and you find that chain link fence and those tired posts, and you step onto that crust and listen and hear nothing, that particular version of nothing, maybe don't take out your phone. Maybe don't take out your camera at all. Look, blink, put it back inside you. I'm telling you this the way a nurse tells a family to brace themselves without saying brace yourselves. I'm telling you that when I look in mirrors now, I sometimes tilt my head the way I did in those photos, and I catch myself about to turn and make room for something small that hasn't asked me to make room, and I choose not to. That choice feels like trying to keep sand from running out of my fist. I can hear Hoyt asking me if I'm going to end on a moral. I'm not. I'm going to end with what's simple. I know what I saw. I don't take pictures anymore, not even of myself. Out there, the sun doesn't cast shadows. It collects them. My name's Roy Chandler. I'm 64 and the calendar says I'm retired. But my body still wakes at 5 like there's a bell hidden somewhere that only old firemen can hear. I live alone now in a cinder block bungalow on the north side of Blackwell, Oklahoma, a mile and a half from the Kansas line. Winters up here can feel like a lid tightened onto a cold jar. The snow stacks up along the fence lines and gets crusted over with ice, and the pines out by the wheat fields groan when the wind shifts. The air tastes like someone put out a wood stove with water. That smell, cold ash, sits in your nose all day. If you need to know anything about me, it's this. I was a fireman for 39 years. I did all right by people, or tried to. There was one call I didn't do right by, and I have carried it like a hot coal in a closed fist ever since. A kid, house fire. I don't tell that story in detail anymore. It turns people's faces into the kind of mirror you don't want to look into. They say I've got mild dementia. Some days I set my coffee down and forget about it until 3 in the afternoon. Or I drive to the feed store when I meant to go to the pharmacy. Most days I'm fine. On the worst days, though, it feels like my mind slips forward a half step, like I'm walking on black ice. I can see where I'm going, but the ground is moving under me. This past winter, early January, I took it into my head to visit my old pastor's grave one last time before the property got sold off. The churchyard is about 20 minutes north of town, a little wooden church with a bell that stopped ringing before I was born. The cemetery behind it is small, maybe 50 plots, bounded by 2 lines of thick pines and a wire fence that catches tumbleweeds in the summer and drifts of snow in the winter. Pastor Harlan baptized me in a metal stock tank out behind that church. He was the only man I've ever seen talk to God like he was standing right there, then wipe his hands on his pants and go fix a carburetor. He died 10 years back. His wife kept the church going on weddings and potlucks for a while. But the roof went soft, the paint peeled, and people started driving to town for services. Mrs. Doolin, the caretaker, still keeps the cemetery neat. She's in her mid-70s now, all elbows and brisk steps. One of those women who can carry 2 shovels and a rake in one hand and make it look like knitting needles. I've always liked her. She reminds me of my mother, the way she calls a spade and then hands you the spade. The day I went out there, snow fell steady, quiet as a stray dog. The flakes were the small, dry kind, more like sifted flour than feathers. I shoveled out the end of my narrow driveway and warmed my old F-150 until the frost lines pulled back from the windshield. The thermometer on the dash read 18. I packed a thermos of coffee and an old push broom to clear the headstones, and I drove north until the radio ran out and left me with the hiss under the hiss. Out by the church, the gravel lot was unplowed, but my tires packed a lane quick enough. The church itself leaned a little more than it had last spring. The bell tower slouched like a tired man with one hand on a doorframe. The windows were crusted white. I could hear under the wind the far hum of highway trucks a couple miles off. That sounds like a moth against a screen door from that distance. Constant. So small you'd miss it unless you were alone. I parked facing the cemetery and cut the engine. The quiet came down like a curtain. When I opened my door, flakes pitched in and melted on my jeans. I stood there for a minute and watched the pines sway. They crackle when the wind pushes them, not like dry twigs, but with a long, low groan that sounds if you let it, like someone thinking out loud. I saw tire tracks and footprints leading toward the church stoop. Mrs. Doolin comes out most days. Sure enough, the side door banged open and she stepped out, bundled in a brown coat that looked older than me. She had a knitted hat with a green pom-pom mashed down over her gray hair. Roy Chandler. "You picked a day, didn't you?" she called, stepping true, long legs high up through the powder. "Couldn't stay inside," I said, lifting the broom like an explanation. "Figured I'd say hello to folks." She nodded at the cemetery. "They'll be glad for company. Your pastor's over by the pines, second row. You remember, the plow won't make it out here until tomorrow, if then. Watch your step." Ground's hard as God's table. You keeping warm? She snorted. Warm enough? I'll be in the office. There's a space heater and some coffee if you decide you're not as tough as I think. I brought my own, I said, then added, thank you. Though, because my mother, gone 20 years, still flinches in my head when I forget my manners. She gave me that sharp, soft look she hands out like bread to stupid men. Tell him I said hi. Pastor Harlan. He married me and Sean in that church back when the paint was white. I will, I said. I went on into the cemetery. The snow came up to mid-shin, dry enough to squeak under my boots. I brushed the first stones I saw, names I didn't know, and said hello to them anyway. It's a habit I picked up when I started visiting my wife, Helen. If they mattered enough once for someone to carve their names into stone, the least I can do is speak them. It makes the place feel less like a warehouse. Pastor Harlan's stone is plain gray with husband, father, shepherd on it. I brushed the letters clean and stood there, leaning on the broom handle like a cane. I told him about the weather and the cost of milk, about my neighbor's dog that keeps digging under the fence. I told him the county was selling the church land and that I didn't know if that meant the cemetery would get moved, but I hope not. My breath smoked up in front of me and fluttered in a wind I couldn't feel. You were right about the coffee, I said, and then, because I never say it to anyone who can answer me back, I said, I still think about that boy. The pines creaked. Far off, a truck shifted gears. I stayed until my fingers started to ache inside the gloves. On the way back to the truck, I swept the snow off a few more stones, mostly out of fairness. A family named Burkhead, a private from the war who died at 19, a baby who only had one date carved. I talked to them all a little, and then I saw it. A small boot, half buried, sticking up from the snow at an angle, toe toward the sky. My body did the thing before my mind caught up. Knees in the snow, hands digging, eyes already braced for a shape I'd known before. A kid's leg, an arm. The feeling of cloth under cold ice, but there wasn't anything there. 2 inches down, no leg. No hole even. Just packed frozen earth and dense old snow. I brushed away more, sweeping back the powder with my forearm. The boot sat there, cut clean into the ground like a sculpture. I worked my fingers around it until my knuckles knocked against something solid. The boot didn't give. It was as if it came up out of the dirt and ended a 1/4 inch under the surface. I tugged slow, careful. It didn't move. I told myself it was a toy. A decoration blown off a grave at Christmas. People put little things by the children's stones. Bears, angels, rusty trucks. But that boot was no plastic thing. It was leather, red-brown, small as a cat's head. There were tiny stitches in the toe. I could see where salt had dried in a faint ring around the heel. I sat back, nowhere to put my eyes. Something about it made my shoulders stand up by themselves. That's new, I said out loud, like I was in a hardware store. My voice sounded too calm. I stood up because I needed my feet under me. The wind shifted and ran its hands through the trees. I listened to it like I always do, long enough to understand it and then forget it. But there was something in it I didn't like. A high note that caught at the corner of my ear, and it wasn't the squeal of a truck brake. It sounded like a kid crying. Not sharp, not even close or clear. Just a small, familiar keening. The way an unhappy kid sounds when he's trying not to bring his mother. The wind tugged it along the cemetery fence, and I felt it go into me like cold. I turned and looked back at the church. The office light was on behind the frosted window. I could picture the space heater glowing like a coal, Mrs. Doolan's bony hands wrapped around a styrofoam cup. I thought about going to get her. I thought about how I would stand there and explain what I'd found. The words sounded like a lie even before I said them. Roy, I told myself. It's the wind. It's the bus station in your head. Don't you start. I looked again at the boot. It sat there, red-brown against the white. I don't know how long I stood thinking about that boy I didn't save. And because I can't let sleeping hellions lie, I brushed 2 more stones. The ones nearest the boot, looking for a family plot that might have had a child. The names didn't ring. I felt like a man rummaging through the drawers in a house that ain't his. The wind let go of the crying sound and shifted back to its old moan. I told myself I'd come back with a spade in March when the ground would give, and see what in the world someone had buried there. When I reached my truck, the first thing I noticed was the wet fog on the inside of the windshield. I'd been gone 15-20 minutes and the truck was dead quiet, but a gray bloom of breath had spread from the center of the glass, dripping thin runs down to the dash. It looked like someone had been sitting in the driver's seat with their face an inch from the window. breathing slow. I stopped dead. The key was in my pocket. The doors had been locked. I'm good about that. The handle rattled when I tried it locked. I waited, not sure from what for what. There are moments like that, even at my age, when you're waiting for the world to pick a side. I stood there in the falling snow, the broom in my right hand, the thermos in my left, and tried to make the facts behave. Locked door, breath on the inside glass. No breath now that I was looking. No one in the cab. No tracks in the snow. My own footprints circling the truck. The cold pressing into my teeth, then I saw the marks. 4 small handprints. Not full hands, just the half crescents of fingers splayed against the inside of the windshield. Left of center, at a height no taller than my belt. The palm shapes were a fogged smear, like someone had leaned with their weight and slid. The prints were clear for 3 inches and then faded into the glass. I forgot to breathe long enough that when I started again, it felt like I'd been punched. I don't know how long I stared. The old habit kicked in, approach the problem. Check the latch, observe, decide. I set the broom down, wiped my gloves against my jeans, and unlocked the door. The smell inside hit me first. Not a bad smell, more like damp wool and old pennies, not mine. I leaned across the bench seat and touched 2 fingers to the prints. Cold wetness came away on my glove tips. I shut the door again and stood in the snow and looked at the church and the pines and the road. I half expected to see a kid running, small boots punching through the drifts, puffs of breath trailing like cartoon thought bubbles. There was no one, just the pines nodding on their old hinges and the snow like static. I took a slow breath and told myself 2 things at once. It's in your head. And it isn't. I drove a lot of hard calls with 2 things in my head at once, and you learn to steer between them like a farmer between ruts. I climbed into the truck, wiped the inside of the windshield with a rag I keep rolled up under the seat, and forced my hands to be steady on the wheel. I let the engine run and the heat clear the glass. I watched the handprints fade as the defroster did its work. The wet ovals thinned, then smudged, then became nothing but 4 pale arcs, then nothing. I sat there until I could see my face in the glass and not much else. If this were a story on the internet, told by someone with a better grip on their memory than mine, maybe it would have ended there. A boot that isn't a boot. Handprints that no longer exist. But my life's not a story, and your life isn't either. And the thing about life is it doesn't like to stop right where it will leave you alone. I figured I'd check on the church before I left. The wind pushed me sideways as I walked, the snow stinging my cheeks. When I pushed the office door open, the bell tied to the top clanged and hit the wood twice. The little room smelled like dust and hot plastic from the space heater. On the desk sat a ledger and a cracked picture frame with a photo of a much younger Mrs. Doolin, and a man I guessed was Sean, both of them with wet eyes and church grins. "You're back quicker than I expected," she said, turning from the file cabinet. Up close, you could see lines around her mouth that were more like pencil scratches than wrinkles. "How's the Reverend?" "Still quiet," I said. "You ever seen something out there, a toy boot stuck in the ground?" She frowned at me. "A toy boot? Like from a doll?" "Real boot," I said. My voice didn't like the story any more than my eyes had. Small. Like a child's. Couldn't dig it up. She tilted her head, imagining a thing where there wasn't one. "Haven't seen it," she said, "but I don't walk all the rows when it's like this. I pick my battles this time of year." "Did you trip over it?" "No," I said, her eyes softened. "You look like you've had a fright, Roy. You want to sit a minute? I got coffee that tastes like someone washed a boot in it. But it's hot. I'm all right," I told her. "Just cold. Wind's got a sound to it today. The only sound the wind's got is what you bring to it." She said it like a thing she'd had to tell herself a few times. "If you need anything, you knock. I'll be here until 3. "Thank you," I said. I left and stood under the little overhang and watched the snow for another minute, because I couldn't bring myself to go back to the boot without pretending to decide to. The highway hummed out there somewhere. The wind keyed the pines into that note again, almost like a child's voice leaning through a doorframe and whispering a secret. On the way back through the cemetery, I cut wide around where the boot had been. I didn't want to see it again. I didn't want to not see it. I picked a dumb fight with myself about which choice was the brave one. In the end, I walked straight to it like a man stepping onto a dentist's porch. The boot was still there. The snow had drifted around it and made a little hollow. My own knee prints from before were already going soft at the edges. I stood over it with my hat off, for no good reason I can explain beyond respect. I stared down at that small leather toe in the crusted ring of salt. The wind came hard then, the way it can, a freight train from a place without fences. It shoved the trees until they answered with a long, low sound. Under it, a thin string of a voice came like floss pulling through a tooth. "Help me." It wasn't a scream. It wasn't loud or long. It was a small, dry plea like someone speaking into a well. I have heard men shout it and women sob it. But I had never heard a child say it so softly that it felt like a secret they needed you to keep. I turned in a slow circle because I couldn't not, scanning the ground and the trees and the blank sky and the church door. There was nothing but falling white, and marks of my own boots and the snow climbing the fence wires. "Where are you?" I said before my mind grabbed my tongue. The word came out like a white thread. "Here," the wind said, or didn't. "Here." I leaned because my body knows how to do that, toward the sound, toward the ground. I turned my head because your ear helps you look better than your eye does. Then I was kneeling, because I had been kneeling like this before, because my knee bones know that shape. My hand went out because it always goes out. It found the snow over the dirt and pressed. Cold flooded my glove. "Can you hear me?" I said. "We'll get you out." "Hold on a second, help me," the ground said, exactly like before, clearer now, smaller. "I've got you," I said, and my voice broke on that old rut in the road inside me. "Just keep talking. Tell me your name." The snow under my glove pulsed, a trick of my own heartbeat in my fingers or a thing I will always wonder about. I brushed the snow aside, scraping it with my bare hand, not feeling the cold. I clawed at the earth until my nails yammered on something hard. I pulled at it. I thought it was a rock until the edge of it came into view, until the shape made sense all at once. It wasn't a coffin. It wasn't a box. It was granite, and my own name was carved on it. I had been kneeling in front of my family plot. I knew it because I know where my wife lies and where the stone for my parents sits, and where the blank space beside Helen waited for me like a chair pulled out at a kitchen table. I had cleared this stone before and memorized the way frost fills in the letters. The cold has a handwriting. The R in Roy collects a little shelf of ice always, and the anchor date under my name, the first one, has a hairline chip in the 9. The second date, my end date, was a dash. A straight line, empty after. It looked like the sweat made when you run a finger down a cold window. I sat back so fast I almost tipped into the drift behind me. The world got a little white around the edges. People talk about that in movies like it's a metaphor, but it happens. It's your blood deciding it likes your heart better than the rest of you. I stood, then sat again because the standing had nothing in it. The wind shivered the pines and went quiet, like it had stepped behind a wall. I told myself it was a trick a mind can play when it's too full. I told myself I was mixing old regret with new sight. I told myself a dozen names for the same thing. Across the cemetery, the office door opened and shut. I looked up to see if it was Mrs. Doolin, but whoever it was had already gone inside again, or the door had just banged in the wind. I don't know. I didn't call out. I didn't want to explain my face. I brushed my name clean again, even though I hadn't put any snow on it. The habit's a hard one. I read my wife's name out loud, and my mother's and my father's. Then I said in a voice that felt small in my chest, "Is there someone here who needs me?" There wasn't an answer the way some people mean that word. The wind didn't bend or whistle. The trees didn't creak. But in the snow at my feet, in the thin layer that the wind hadn't managed to disturb, I saw it. 4 small ovals, soft depressions like fingertips pressed gently into fresh flour. They were inside the arc of my knees where I'd just been. My hands went cold in a new way. "I hear you," I said. "I hear you." I hated how it sounded like I was begging. Another set of marks showed up. Not prints exactly, but small slides, like hands that don't know how to push on snow. They were leading away toward the line of pines. I followed them because I'm a man who follows smoke. The marks don't hold their shape long. Snow is a forgetful witness. After a few steps, everything was unmarked again. Just the wind's handwriting and my own. I stopped there, in the space between the plots and the trees, my breath showing me that I was still doing it. I knew with the part of my head that still has a good compass that I was out of my depth. Not the bad kind, just the old kind. The kind that says you don't swim across the quarry in winter. I walked back to the truck, because I couldn't stand in that place much longer. And I told myself I would go home and set the kettle on and sit at the kitchen table until my hands stopped trying to turn into birds. I told myself I would come back another day with a better mind. I set the broom in the bed and reached for the driver's door, and that's when I heard it again. The voice was closer now, and lower, like it had learned my name. Help me. You think I ran to the office for Mrs. Doolin. You think I banged open the door and used the phone on the wall and brought out the shovels, and we both dug until our arms trembled. That would have been wise, the way a plan is wise when you speak it out loud in a warm room. I didn't do that. I turned and walked back into the cemetery, past the boot that wasn't a boot, past the stones I'd brushed clean, past the Burkheads and the 19-year-old private, past the baby's single date. I walked until I was standing again at my family plot looking down at my own name. The snow there was smooth, the white kind that turns to crystals if you breathe on it. I took off my glove and put my hand flat against the dash under my name. The stone stung. I leaned down until my ear almost touched the letters, and I listened, like I've listened at 1,000 doors. 1,000 walls. Help me, said the place where I was going to be. I hear you, I said, and the words ghosted back at me from the stone. I hear you, I dug then, with my numb hand, with my glove, with the useless broom bristles. I worked the snow off the plot and scraped at the rim of frozen dirt around the stone. I know it makes no sense to tell you that I thought there'd be a hatch, a seam I hadn't noticed all these years. I was acting out a thing the way a person acts out putting their body between a wheel and a child, not because it works, but because it's the only movement you have. I became aware of the sound of a door again. The office, the church, I couldn't tell. A shape moved in the edge of my eye and I turned my head too fast. The world swung and corrected itself. It was only the wind checking the bell tied over the office door, giving it a small irritated ring, the sound a finger makes on a glass. Roy, someone called. You all right out there? Fine, I said. My voice didn't reach the door. It fell in the snow at my feet like a coat. I sat back on my heels, the numb burned into my hands now. The girl in the snow, because by then I had decided it was a girl, though I have no reason to tell you that, didn't speak again. The silence was a thick shirt I couldn't get off. I had the sudden sense that the office window was a second face watching me, the way a full sink can feel like someone looking. I stood. I brushed my coat and my knees because some motions help even if you're not sure what. I went back to the truck, opened the door, slid in and started the engine. I sat there with my hands on the wheel and my eyes on the rearview mirror, which showed me nothing but the gray back window and the snow melting in slow tears down the glass. My breath fogged a little and disappeared. The handprints didn't come back. The boot stayed where it was, a small, neat accusation of leather and salt. I drove home. That's all I did. I didn't stop for groceries. I didn't call anyone. I went inside my bungalow and turned the kettle on and then forgot why. I stood by the sink for a long time with my hands on the cool edge, watching a dark track appear, slow as a vein, where a line of snow melt worked its way off my coat and down the cabinet to the floor. When the kettle screamed, I shut it off. I didn't make tea. I didn't sleep much that night. The wind rose and fell. The pines behind the house whispered like a sparrow trying to speak a human language. Once, at maybe 2 in the morning, I got up to check the front door and found it already checked. I looked through the peephole and saw only falling white under the streetlight and my truck's lump shouldered up against the snowbank. My hand left a round of fog on the door, and inside that fog I saw 4 small ovals fan out and fade. I yanked my hand back and it was only my own breath. I waited with my forehead against the wood until the cold worked its way through to my skin. In the morning, I told myself I'd been lonely and tired and old. I told myself stories are the other way we remember. I told myself the boot was an ornament that someone had pushed into frozen ground, and that I'd lose track of it when the thaw came. I told myself the wind had a trick in it that day. I never told anyone. Not the guys from the department I still play cribbage with on Thursdays. Not my neighbor with the digging dog. Not the doctor who asks me to track a pen with my eyes and says we're doing fine. We're doing fine. If I told anybody, it would be you, and I guess that's what this is. When it snowed again in February, I drove back out there. I didn't pretend it was for exercise. I didn't pretend it was for Pastor Harlan, although I talked to him a long while anyway. I cleared his name and the dates and told him a joke that didn't land. I brushed the stones of my folks. Then I walked the rows until I found the boot again. It was in a slightly different place this time. Or maybe I had misremembered. It was closer to the pines, angled like a foot just starting to take a step. I dug with my hands. The ground wouldn't give. I pressed my palm to the dirt and waited. "Help me," the cold said. Or the wind, or the space between my ears. "I'm here," I said. "I'll be here." I go back now every winter day when I can swing it. When the roads aren't a skating rink, when Mrs. Doolan's little office window glows like a coal in the church's side. She asked once, with that brusque kindness of hers, if I wanted her to walk the rows with me. I said no, and she nodded like she understood, and maybe she does. If I had to explain it clean, I'd say this. There are places the world is thin. The churchyard is thin in winter. The lines on my brain scans probably are too. Sometimes two thin things find each other and make a sound you can't unhear. That's the best I can do. It isn't much. I haven't told anyone because telling makes it smaller and stranger at the same time. And like I said, I don't want to explain my face, but I keep the broom in the bed of the truck and a spade behind the seat, though they clank in a way that sets my teeth. I keep my thermos full. I keep my hands warm. When the snow starts to fall and the world gets quiet enough that you can hear the highway hum like a fly trapped between panes of glass, I drive north, and I park, and I walk the rows, and I listen. You can tell the living from the dead by who answers back, and I'm not sure which I am anymore.